Hello, welcome to another marathon for Asian Cinema Season 2017, and this, as you've seen in the title, is Kurosawa in Color, a movie marathon, where I'm going to be watching a bunch of films from the legendary Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa from his color period, which started in 1970. He was making films back in the 40s, all the way up to the 1990s before he died, and I've only ever seen one of his films that were made in color, of which I believe there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 films he did in color, I'm pretty sure. And the only one I've seen is Ran. And I've talked about Kurosawa before, but for the benefit of this being a very big kind of Kurosawa video, I'll be talking about a few of his films. I first got into his movies in 2011 when I watched Seven Samurai for the first time. I've told the story so many times, so I'll just leave that there, but that was the film that blew open the doors for me for foreign films and really watching a lot of different films, and it changed my life as far as a movie watcher and really opened my eyes to the possibilities of stories told in different countries and in different eras. Because before that I certainly wouldn't have ever thought or dreamed of watching a silent film or a really old French film, etc, etc. 2011, Seven Samurai spurred me on to buy the BFI DVD set, the Samurai Collection from Kurosawa, which had Yojimbo, Sanjuro, Throne of Blood, Hidden Fortress, and Seven Samurai, all of which I watched and really enjoyed. I also picked up Rashomon, which I didn't enjoy as much, especially considering how much it was praised as a masterpiece. But as you may have seen at the beginning of Asian Cinema Season 2017, I rewatched it and fell in love with it. It was a real eye-opening experience to see it for a second time. Rashomon's incredible. And then I kind of slacked a bit on the Kurosawa. 2012 came, I did a little project called Akira Kurosawa Appreciation Night. Did a little marathon, not unlike this, where I watched, I think, Ran, Ikiru, and there was another one. I can't remember the other film I watched for. I think I watched Yojimbo with Connie and showed her that for the first time. Then, in 2013, I actually made a New Year's resolution to watch all of Kurosawa's films. I think he made 30 in total, or around that number, and I didn't really get any kind of footing in that whatsoever. 2014 came around, I started the Blu-ray Brothers channel with Ryan Chataway and Robbie Webster. We did a Kurosawa week, and I did a special video where I watched his first 5 films. Sanshiro Sugata Part 2, I think The Most Beautiful was the third one, No Regrets for Our Youth, and The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail, which I love that one. So I saw the first 5 films of his career. And then, I think the year after that, I did my Japanathon, and I watched Drunken Angel, which I adored. I love that film. And then again, I slacked a little bit. This year I watched for the first time Stray Dog, which was very good. So yeah, I kind of take the approach to filmmakers that I love, or even studios that I love, such as Studio Ghibli. If I know I'm going to love these films, or at least really appreciate them, and they're from a director that I really like, or an actor that I really like, it could be that as well, I like to kind of savor them. I don't like to kind of power through all of them. As fun as that can be sometimes, I really treasure those first watch experiences. The day where I don't have another Kurosawa film to watch for the very first time will be a pretty sad one. But today is not that day, because I still have quite a few to go. There's The Idiot, there's loads. There's just so many of them, including most of his color films. Redbeard is probably the biggest one that I'm kind of holding out on a Criterion for, because that film has not been released in high definition yet, and I've been waiting for so long to see that. I love Toshiro Mifune, and that was his last film with Kurosawa, so I'm kind of hoping that at some point they're going to announce the high definition version of Redbeard, particularly with the Criterion Collection. That would be fantastic. Also, I Live in Fear is a big one, for me anyway, that I haven't seen yet. So, today I'm going to watch at least 3 of Kurosawa's color films. I could maybe go to 4, but I think given the length of the films, I think 3 is the best I'm going to be able to get today, but we'll see. I have 2 Criterion Blu-rays. And again, these are all films I've never seen before, and if you know the Criterion Collection well, especially in relation to Kurosawa, you should know which 2 films those are, because there's only 2 of them that they've released on Blu-ray from his color period. And I've actually got Filmstruck up and ready, so before I get to the 2 Criterions that I'm the most interested in seeing, I think what I'm going to do is turn to Filmstruck, the streaming service that features classic films and has also partnered with the Criterion Collection. It is only a North American thing. You can get around that, and so I've been subscribed to them for quite a while, and really just an incredible wealth of fantastic films, but not just that, the special features. Anyway, I kind of talk about Filmstruck far too much, I feel like, so I'm going to open it up, see what they got, and pick my first film. I don't know what it is yet, I'm quite excited, and I'll probably watch that and then got on to the 2 Criterion Blu-rays that I've got. It is currently 1:30 in the afternoon. I really wanted to start this in the morning, but got to do some adulting, so I got a couple of hours of work done this morning, went out to the shop, got some stuff. The snow outside is starting to fall now as we're getting into the middle of November. It's getting a lot colder. I think it dropped just below 0 today. But it's nice out, you know, it's brisk. And yeah, the winter has definitely arrived, I feel like, because it took a long while for it to get here this year. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. What am I talking about? Let's talk about the movies. But before that, I have some food ready as well, which I'm dying to get into. I haven't eaten yet properly today, so I've got 2 loaded sandwiches with some chicken, lettuce, and tomato, and a couple of tomato pieces that didn't quite fit into the sandwich. I have a bag of crisps here. Paprika flavor. They're really nice, kind of. They feel light, that you don't feel too bad when you eat them, even though it's, you know, it's crisps. And then I also have a nice cold glass of Pepsi with some ice cubes in it. Love that sugar. Alright, so I'm going to pick the film and get cracking. I'm really excited. I'm so excited for this, and I've been feeling quite rough as well the past couple of days. My face seems to be breaking out in stuff, which feels horrible. I got this like lump on my head that's been there for about 2 weeks. It just doesn't seem to be going away. Anyway, enough blathering. Let's get to the first film. Alright, I got Filmstruck loaded up on the Akira Kurosawa page. They have most of his films, actually, and these are all of the first ones I was talking about. The Most Beautiful, that was actually one that I watched on like a downloaded copy, and the subtitles were awful, so I'd actually be interested in watching this again with like more official subtitles, because it was almost unwatchable. And it wasn't a great film, but I feel like I kind of owe it to myself to watch it in a more proper format anyway. So yeah, going all the way down to the bottom of his career, and then we go up to Stray Dog, Rashomon, Scandal. Never heard of that one. Definitely one to check out if Toshiro Mifune's in it. I mean, any Kurosawa film is one to check out, but you know what I mean. Kiru, masterpiece. Seven Samurai, masterpiece. The Lower Depths, that's one that I've heard of but don't know much about. Throne of Blood, fantastic. The Bad Sleep Well, that's another one I haven't seen. Yojimbo Sanjuro, High and Low is an absolute masterpiece. I love that film. And as I said, Redbeard there in 1965. So I think after Redbeard, Kurosawa hit a bit of a lull in his career, and you know, a lot of things fell through, and he had a real rough go of things following that kind of golden period in the 50s and 60s where he was making so many great films. So what I've decided to do is check out this one here from 1970, which was his first film in colour. And again, he was going through a very tumultuous period in not just his career but his life at this point. There is another one, Dersu Uzala, I think is how to pronounce that one, from 1975 that he made in Russia. But that is in the book, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. So I'll be reviewing that as part of this season. This won't be a part of this video. And then they have Madadayo, which is his final film from 1993. I'd love to get to that one for this marathon, but I don't think I'll be able to, time-wise. But we'll see what happens. So I'm going to go with this film from 1970, Dodes'ka-den, from 1970, 2 hours and 19 minutes. I don't even want to look. I don't want to read the plot. I don't know anything about it. It's his first film in colour. That's good enough for me. So I'm going to get cracking on with it, see what I think. And hopefully I enjoy. And I don't know how I'll do this, whether it'll be vlog style or just plain reviews. We'll see what happens. But anyway, time to get started. Okay, I'm about 6-7 minutes into Dodes'ka-den. It's a weird title. I don't know what it means either. And I just wanted to remark upon the colour. Immediately, like, the credit sequence was so cool. I really enjoyed that. And there's a scene that takes place with a mother and her son praying in this room, and the room is full, wall to wall, of all these drawings that apparently the son has done of the tram that goes past their house. And it's just so colourful. Like, again, going back to Hidden Fortress, which I talked about at the beginning of Asian cinema season this year, you know, seeing the first widescreen Kurosawa film, it's not just like, okay, this is the first film he did in widescreen, just as an aside. This is the first film he did in widescreen. Like, holy shit. Opens up the scope. It feels like just the next evolution of this filmmaker. And this film, which isn't in widescreen, it seems, regardless, just everything's popping. Like, it's full of, like, primary colors. And I just love the idea that he's like, right, I'm going to make a color film for the first time, and I'm going to make a color film, you know. Kurosawa doesn't do things, you know, half-assed. But again, knowing that he was going through such a rough period at this time was kind of sad, but I'm not sure on the exact timeline of that. But I just know that he didn't have the best go of things after that initial kind of glory year period of his career, I suppose. Anyway, no idea about the plot so far, or whether this will be a singular kind of following this one character. I don't know anything about it, so it's kind of exciting. 2 hours and 20 minutes, so I should get on with it, and hope to kind of have enough time for the next 2 films, which are 2 hours and 3 hours respectively. So no short films today. And I've been doing a marathon recently where it's all really short films, which are really easy to just power through. But these films, you need to give them time, which I'm going to do now. So I'm going to continue on and probably come back to you at the very end unless I feel like talking in between for whatever reason. Alright, I'm done with Dodes'ka-den, 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 Dodes'ka-den. Yeah, it's funny, like I did that clip like 7 minutes into me watching the film saying Dodes'ka-den? I didn't know what the title was in relation to the film. If I just waited an extra like minute and a half until I filmed that clip, I would have known exactly where the title of the film comes from. It's a young boy from the beginning of the film who has a fascination with trams, and he drives his own imaginary tram around his neighborhood, and he chants Dodes'ka-den, Dodes'ka-den, meaning the onomatopoeic interpretation from his point of view of the sound of the tram starting up and da-dun, 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 you know, just the sound, that's all it is. But he isn't really a big part of the film. Well, he is and he isn't. And I feel like all the characters in this film are both a big part of the film and not a big part of the film. It's a frustrating one for me, and I kind of dived into people's opinions on the film, Letterboxd, things like that, and it seems very split. A lot of people think it's middle of the road, a few people think it's pretty bad, and a lot of people think it's like a great masterpiece. I definitely fall in the middle, I guess. I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. It was a struggle to stay awake through some of it. Last night I woke up at 2 in the morning feeling really sick, and so I didn't get back to sleep till about 3:30. So a little bit tired, and when it's a film like this, it's kind of tough to keep your attention going because it keeps jumping around all the time, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with films like that, but this is very much not an anthology film, but it's a film that deals with lots of different characters and lots of different concurrent storylines at the same time. I mentioned the young boy who has kind of, I guess, mental challenges, who goes around his neighborhood in an imaginary tram car. Now his neighborhood is a junk heap. It's a shanty town. I mean, the majority of this 2 hour and 20-minute movie takes place basically in a junkyard. You know, it's, well, not a junkyard, but I mean, there's, as far as I can see, you know, except for maybe the faint dots of, you know, lights down in the city, they're living in just garbage, basically. And so you have these people in squalor and poverty, and we follow lots of different characters inside this very small home. Well, not homeless, I guess they have a home, but it feels like a homeless community. They have very little. I mean, they have jobs and so on, and they have their own little houses, but the houses are just like barely kind of strung together. They're just bits of panels stuck from all different kinds of resources. You can just tell that every part of every home in this film has been cobbled together with whatever they can find, and they just are living on basically nothing. And even one group of characters in the film, a man and his young son, they live basically in the back of a car. So it's a very depressing film just from that alone. And apparently Kurosawa didn't choose to film his first movie in color because, hey, I guess I better keep up with the times. It was more, well, this story's really depressing, so let's kind of give it this burst of color to kind of counteract that. And it does have a very interesting effect when you have these people living in squalor, like I said, but everything's so colorful. It kind of takes the edge off just a little bit, and the characters will wear colorful clothes, but it doesn't betray the realism of the setting. It's not like it feels like it's unreal. Well, it does at times, but I mean, the clothes that they're wearing when they're colorful, which helps the whole kind of, again, bright and vibrant color tone of the film, it feels like just stuff they, okay, that jumper, I'm going to wear that jumper like every day, bright red or whatever. It doesn't feel, again, like it portrays the sense of realism of these people actually living like this. But there are these moments of the surreal at times, especially with the homeless man and his son who live in the back of a car, because throughout the entire film he is building their house in his mind, and he's like, yes, we're going to have a gate, and it's going to be in the Scottish style, or maybe the English style, and we see it imagined in this kind of picturesque, surreal version of a green, lush hill with an iron gate, and he builds the house in his mind and is telling his son, like, what should we do? How should we decorate it? What should the house look like? What color should it be? And we see it get built in these abstract images, and there are these moments of abstract visual imagery in the film. There's a scene where he's outside the car with his son on his back. His son's very sick, and the backdrop is completely fake, and it's this kind of orangey kind of, and it's very, very unreal. Whereas the majority of the film, on location, looks very authentic and so on, but there'll be those moments jumped in there where it feels completely wild and different, and I liked that kind of visual flair that was injected into the film, and it certainly felt like a suitable way to do it. It didn't feel random or done for the sake of just having cool imagery. It certainly fit the random kind of scattershot tone of not only the story, but the random scattershot feel of the people's lives that we follow in the film. And there's also a cyclical feeling to their lives as well, where they're going through the same thing over and over again. There's a group of drunk guys who basically swap their wives, and in the morning they don't seem to even realize this. And those characters, I think, just really outstayed their welcome. By the end, I was just like, okay, I've had enough of them falling over each other drunk. We're not achieving anything here other than showing that they're not changing. Also, I feel like the balance was a little bit off with some of the characters. There's a guy who has a tic where he's like that all the time, but he's in the first part of the film, and then we catch up with him like an hour and 10 minutes down the line, and I feel like if you're only going to have a character in a film 3 times, it's 2.5 hours long. Well, I guess he spaced it out evenly enough, but I just felt like in the middle of the film, it's like, oh yeah, that guy. I don't know, I felt like when you're doing lots of different concurrent storylines, you need to find some semblance of balance, and I don't think it felt perfectly balanced to me. Then again, what is balance? What is a film? You can go into all that kind of stuff, but I just felt like some of it didn't play out as well as it could have, and there's a lot of good elements to the film. It looks good, well, it looks good as in it's shot well. There's not a lot of moving camera, there's not a lot of that kind of stuff that you usually associate with Kurosawa films, but the framing is very good, the composition is good and so on, but it's more honing in on these characters. It's this character study, but I felt like the way that it was done didn't really evoke much emotion by the end. I mean, it's a depressing film. There's a storyline of a man who never speaks, and he's clearly been destroyed by something. And halfway through the film we kind of find out what that is, or we get the inkling of what that is. And so we kind of hope that throughout the film, or by the end, he'll learn to kind of get over it or change. Spoilers, he doesn't. And so it very much feels like you're spending so much time on this, ultimately to get no result, and that is very much the point of that character. But it can be a slog at times when it comes to things like that. There's a lot of frustration involved in some of the dilemmas that the characters go through. And you really feel, again, frustrated about the predicament that they're in, and I suppose that's part of it too. But overall, I feel like by the end of it, I wasn't that satisfied by the end of it. Not that it's a story that needs to satisfy you, but just artistically, I didn't feel like it all came round together in the end in a way that it could have, because I liked a lot about it. I liked some of the acting. Some of the acting was very good. The young kid of the man and the boy who live inside the back of the car was great. He really conveyed the sense of this homeless kid, because, I mean, 5, 6, 7, something like that, maybe even 4, I don't know. Very young kid, but he just really reacted with this sense of hopelessness, but also a feeling of accepting that hopelessness as well. Like, I don't know, there's something about his performance that was very, very good, and I enjoyed a lot. I liked the old man who was kind of helping anyone who needed help. He was kind of the village's grandfather in a way. He was a very fatherly figure, and he was in the film almost a little too little for my liking, I think. I love the scene where a guy comes in to rob him and takes a box, and he's like, no. He wakes up from his bed and he goes, don't take that, that's my tools, please. Money's over there. And he says, actually, I'll get it. He says, I'll get it for you. Here you go. If you need some more, just come back later, you know. Now, can you shut the door on your way out? Come through the front door, you know. Very accommodating to this thief. But it shows that kind of just almost unreal compassion for your fellow man. And everyone is struggling in the film. And there's another scene where he is with a friend, I suppose, this old man who is just so utterly depressed. He wants his life to be over. He talks about how, like, he doesn't feel joy anymore. He doesn't feel anything. He doesn't enjoy food. He just wants to die. And so the old man says, the fatherly figure I was talking about who lives in the town, he says, well, I've got this poison. If you take it, you'll die in an hour, you know, peacefully. And the guy, without even thinking about it, takes it, eats it, drinks some water, says, thank you very much, you know. Oh, thank God, you've saved me. You know, really appreciate it. And then he says, you know, I wasn't always like this, you know. There were good times in my life, but, you know, that's just the way it is. He wanted his life to be over. But then he speaks to the old man and says, you know, I used to have a wife and 2 sons. I lost them in the war. My wife got sick and so on. And, you know, I dream about them every night. And that's the only time I ever feel happy. And the old man says, well, I suppose the fact that you're living your life and you're able to dream about them means that you are happy. And then he suddenly realizes that, hang on, if I die, I lose my connection to, you know, my dreams of my family. And the old man says, yeah, well, if you die, they die, right? And that's just an ideal that I very much identify with. That feeling of, and I'm going to go way off on a tangent here, but with death and the connection we have with people, our family, our friends, you know, when people die, you know, they don't really die. You know, they're still inside your head, that amazing thing we have called memory, that the brain that is so powerful, that we can remember all these things, and we can remember in some way, it's not the real thing, but we remember an essence of someone. When they die, their essence doesn't die. Physically they die. And that's horrible, and that connection can never be formed again, and there is obviously a lot of emotions that go through death and grieving and so on, but the essence of someone can be retained within the experience of the people who knew them. If someone is out there and they don't know anyone and they die, then that's it, they're gone. You know, there's no essence left. And so this old man realizes that and suddenly starts panicking. He's like, I don't want to die, you know, because I'm essentially killing my family too, because, you know, my memories of them will be gone, and then that's it. You know, it's finished. And so he panics and so on, and obviously the old man who gave him the poison, it wasn't really poison. It was kind of a moral lesson to kind of make him realize, you know, how precious life is and so on. That's probably the best scene of the film to me, I thought, and I thought it was played very well by both of them. And there's lots of great little scenes and so on. None as good as that, I think, but, you know, there's a lot to enjoy from the film in terms of drama, you know. Again, not enjoy, but, you know, there's a lot of stuff done very well. There's a storyline with an uncle and his niece that gets very dark, and I feel like, frustratingly, again, it's just frustration, the way that tied up wasn't how I would have liked it to, but that again is the point, I guess. Overall, it's a very bleak film, and there's a very tragic moment at the end of the film, but I feel like it doesn't let it simmer, it doesn't let it kind of stay there. It just quickly cuts to the ending of the film, which is a bit more upbeat, and it's just like, I don't know, you kind of built up for over 2 hours this storyline that ends in a very big way, and then, you know, okay, and then we end. You know, I didn't feel like it really took advantage of what was happening in the story, you know. Now, Kurosawa made this as part of a production with, I forget what the title is, but it was the Four Knights or the Four Men or something like that, and it was in conjunction with these other 3 famous Japanese directors, one of which was Masaaki Kobayashi. And the idea was that these 4 directors would get together. Kon Ichikawa was one of them. So these 4 directors would get together and they would all make films and have this production company, and this was the first one, and it failed. And so they never made another film as part of that production company, the 4 directors. And a year after making this film, and also, just to kind of clear this up, well, not clear this up, but get to this first, because the next bit is really heavy shit as far as, it's not even trivia, it's just the real life story. Kurosawa's previous film, 1965, Redbeard, with Toshiro Mifune, he spent 2 years making that film, and Kurosawa was known as being a perfectionist. You know, people called him the Emperor on set because he was just so demanding of his film crew. He made this film in a month, which was very uncharacteristic for him, you know, but he did it very quickly, and I think it's a very good film, and certainly one worth watching, especially for a Kurosawa fan. And even, I think some people could get different things out of it, you know. I don't feel like this is bad, I don't feel like it doesn't work, but for me personally, I felt like there was so much in it that was really good, but as a whole it didn't quite gel completely for me. So it is, I think, one of my least favourite Kurosawa films, but I would still definitely watch it again. If they put out a Blu-ray of it, I'd be all over that. I definitely think it's worth seeing in high definition, and it looks very good. And again, there are these almost strong elements. There's some bad acting in there, there's some over-the-top acting I didn't like so much. And yeah, so finally, a year after this film came out, it wasn't a success at all. Kurosawa tried to kill himself. He slashed his wrist and his throat 30 times, which is like, that's horrific, you know. And he was unsuccessful, obviously, because he survived and moved on. You know, he was going through health issues as well, and this just seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. And I wasn't aware of that. I had heard somewhere at some point he tried to kill himself, but I wasn't sure when or what was what was the reason and all that kind of thing. But yeah, so this film there's a very bleak overtone to the whole thing, from the film itself to the behind the scenes history with it. Anyway, that's it. Dodes'ka-den, I definitely, again, I don't want to seem like I'm too down on it, because I definitely enjoyed it a lot, and perhaps in a more alert mood I would have enjoyed it more. But I do think that it meanders a bit with the crisscrossing storylines, and you know, more important or perhaps more successful elements could have been highlighted better. Because I just feel like by the time we start to really dig into one of the storylines, we're off into one that just doesn't really feel substantial at all, like the drunk couple, or not couple, but the two friends who are drunks and shared their wives, you know. That was just comic relief, pure and simple. Then you have the other stuff, and the kid who, you know, imagine himself being this tram driver, you know, and the kids in the neighborhood would call him the train freak, and his mother's very upset about this. I mean, that probably gets around 15 minutes of screen time, and that's including the opening of the film, which focuses solely on those two characters for the first like 8 or 9 minutes. Felt like that part was throwaway, you know. I mean, well, not throwaway, but you know, I felt like there was a meaty story to be gleaned from that character who was obsessed with the trams and was driving them around. But then I guess when a character is stuck in that, and there's no resolution to that, then where do you take it, you know? And that is, I guess, the central theme of the film. That surely is the takeaway, that people who live like that are stuck in these cyclical lives where every day is the same and every year is the same. There was another character, and that story, and this storyline was really small. This woman who seemingly slept with the whole village and had kids from every single guy there. And there's a very, you know, well done scene where the oldest boy asks his father, the husband of the woman, you know, are you my real dad? Because everyone says that we all have different fathers. And it's that idea of, look, your dad is the guy who raises you, you know. And that was a good scene, done very well. And it ends on a kind of a joke, but it's a really natural one that really fit the scene and kind of lets you off the hook in a really nice way. So there's lots of good stuff at work here, I think. But yeah, maybe a couple of repeat viewings would improve my thoughts on the film. But that is it. I've waffled on far enough about Dodes'ka-den. And now I'm going to move on with the next one. And I don't know which one I'm going to pick yet. So I'm going to figure out what I'm going to have for dinner for tonight, and look at my 2 criterions and decide which one I'll be progressing with in this Kurosawa in Color marathon. Alright, I have decided on dinner. I'm going to have a new pizza, a new type of flavour that just got added to the brand that we usually have here, Rustica. It is a beef and taco shell concoction, I believe, and so I've popped that in the oven and I'm waiting for it to cook now. Before I wait for it to finish, I'm going to start the second movie. What am I talking about? I'll leave that in. You can have that one for free. And this one I've been so excited to watch. And given how fatigued I was feeling in the first movie, I think it's probably wisest to get the longest film out of the way in this second slot. But it does mean that this will take the 3 movies in a chronological order, which I kind of like. I'm weird like that. And it is a film that I think, again, Kurosawa had trouble with, but this was mainly financial. And I believe that George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola stepped in to help him get this film made, to secure financing and all that good stuff. And it is the Criterion Blu-ray edition of Kagemusha. One of my least favorite covers, quite bland. Although again, if I see the film and kind of get a feeling for what this image is trying to convey, my thoughts might change. This is a 3-hour movie from 1980. And I know very little about it other than it's about, I think, some sort of lord who dies and is replaced by someone else who isn't good to be the replacement. And both are played, I believe, by Tatsuya Nakadai, who is one of my favorite actors of all time. He, much like Toshiro Mifune, did many great films with Kurosawa, though I believe his best work was done with Masaki Kobayashi and Harakiri and the Human Condition trilogy. But Tatsuya Nakadai, he's just so good in almost anything I've seen him in. I'm looking forward to seeing him in another Kurosawa film in color. This one looks like it's very vibrant, and much like the Dodes'ka-den. See, I'm already losing the pronunciation of that. Dodes'ka-den. 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 I drum it into my head like the kid in the film. That was vibrant, but I mean, this one is more. It's a period piece. It's a samurai movie. It's more of Kurosawa's wheelhouse than I feel that film was. At least where he did his best stuff. I mean, you look at Kurosawa's best movies, Seven Samurai, you know, Rashomon. They're samurai movies, you know. All set in that period, anyway. Anyway, enough waffling about Kagemusha and my thoughts on what I'm going to get out of it, because I really don't know. But I'm excited, and I believe 5 years ago, is it 5 years ago? Yeah, when I did my Akira Kurosawa Appreciation Night. That was actually like a communal thing. I wanted people in the community to do it. I think about 4 or 5 people did a video for that, and one of them was Robbie Webster, and I believe this was one of the films he watched. And I think I remember he liked it quite a bit. But either way, I've got a 3-hour movie ahead of me, so I'm going to pop this in and get it started. And then grab my pizza and finish it as quickly as you can finish a 3-hour film, because I'm getting kind of antsy about whether I'll have enough time to watch the third and final film tonight. Tomorrow, I'm not going to have any time to watch any movies, so I need to I want to finish this tonight. So anyway, enough blathering and babbling, let's get the film started. Three Tatsuya Nakadais in one frame. How can you argue with a film that opens up with that? Obviously there's a kind of double split screen going on here. We have at the head, I'm presuming, this Lord, played by Tatsuya Nakadai. On his right, on our left, we have his current impersonator. A lot of times, very important people back in kind of feudal era Japan would have these doubles to kind of be there for protection and so on, in case of assassination attempts and stuff. And this guy on the right is supposed to be, I guess, the next impersonator who looks even more like him. They're kind of remarking upon how his likeness is a miracle. But obviously, all three are played by Tatsuya. I think, anyway. I mean, for sure, these two. But, I mean, it looks like it's 3 of him. So, anyway. I just like that. I thought it was a really cool way to open the film. Sets it up right out of the gate. Okay, maybe I assumed too much right out of the gate, and it didn't set it up as well as I thought it did. This is the Lord's brother on the left, and I'm kind of thinking now this isn't Tatsuya Nakadai. His face looks a little fuller than the real deal in the middle there, so maybe not 3, but, you know, at least 2. I mean, that's got to be Nakadai down there as well, right? I mean, he's placed very strategically here in the part of the frame. So the brother saw this thief who is about to be crucified for stealing, and recognized the resemblance and thought he would make for a good double, I suppose. Anyway, on with the film. You can kind of see the wobble between where the 2 pieces have been stitched together. Don't know if it's coming across, but I can definitely see the line, whereas I can't see any hint over here, so I think that might not be Nakadai. And don't worry, I rewound the scene, I'm still watching everything. Such a great opening. Really long shot as well. Alright, I am 12 minutes into the film. The pizza is out of the oven, smells amazing. And I'm really enjoying so far how Nakadai is portraying the 2 different characters. He has the kind of regal presence and the authority and the seriousness, but as the double, he has this real feeling of just not caring what's going on around him. Like he's sitting there pretending to be the Lord and kind of being there as the body double, but he just couldn't care less about anything else going on around him. He's just got this kind of sly smile on his face, which is really fun. This is actually the real deal in this scene. Anyway, I'm going to eat some pizza, watch some more movie, and get back to you with my thoughts on this film, which I'm enjoying very much so far. It has a real sense of scale, much like Ran had from 1985, so I know that even later on in his career, Kurosawa could still handle this kind of an epic, so I had no qualms about, you know, anticipating something really big and epic and grand in scale from this 3-hour epic. So, on we go. Actually, you know what? Before I continue the film, I'm going to do something in a tribute to the long-lost Friday Night Ritual videos from many different YouTubers. Although I'm thinking mainly of Robbie Webster, even though he didn't originate the Friday Night Ritual. And we're going to give this pizza a first taste test. And much like another YouTuber, I'll see if it feels good in my mouth. So, there's lots of peppers on this, so I'm assuming it's going to be really spicy, but we'll see. So, here we go. Very spicy. That has a kick. This brand, Rustica, the crispness, the base, like the amount of cheese, like it's so perfect. It's just one of the best pizzas ever. We usually get the pepperoni one, which is just like from heaven, but this is, I'm gonna need a drink of water actually. And I also usually spice the pizzas up myself a bit with this here, which is I don't even know what the spices is. I mean, pommes frites is chips. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's just kind of spice that I use on the pizza a lot. One last thing before I continue on with this film, for good this time, is that I'm loving this, and I'm so much more engaged because there's this linear story, and I love films that are told non-linear or don't have a traditional plot. But with Dodes'ka-den, the different storylines, even though they're all set in the same village and stuff, it's hard to kind of grasp onto one through line, especially in a long movie like that, 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's another thing. Kurosawa would make these very long films. Seven Samurai, 3.5 hours long, doesn't feel like it at all. It just breezes by because the story is so good and so well done from beat to beat. Another film of his that's really long, well not really long, but pretty long, is The Hidden Fortress, which I adore, but it drags a little bit at times. So I'll be intrigued to see how this 3-hour epic holds up in terms of the pacing. But yeah, I'm just loving getting into the story of it, so that's the main thing. Anyway, I'm going to carry on now. Watch this shot coming up. It's just... It's just outrageous, isn't it? It's just incredible. Okay, I'm about 40 minutes into the film, and I just felt like I need to get this out before I finish the film. I seem to have got something else wrong. I was saying how I like the way Nakadai is playing both Kagemusha and the thief imposter, or not imposter, the thief double. It's actually Kagemusha is the double, and the Lord Shingen is the the real deal. But also Kagemusha just got introduced to like the higher ups in the clan, and they were blown away by how much he looked like their lord. So the scene I saw earlier when they're all planning out this battle and stuff, and the Lord is sat there kind of just smirking and not taking it very seriously, that was the real Lord. So I guess that's part of Shingen's character, that he is a bit playful, I suppose. So we're now, again, 40 minutes into the film. They've just unveiled Kagemusha as this second double, along with the Lord Shingen's brother. So now we're playing into this idea of all the different clan bosses around Japan kind of finding out that the Lord might be injured. So they're trying to kind of put feelers out to see if he's still around, see if a double is there. And they've gone and investigated, and they've checked to see if it's a double, but they've noticed that this Kagemusha looks just like him, like the likeness is perfect, basically, that they believe the Lord is still alive. So yeah, I don't know where the film's going to go for the next 2 hours and 20 minutes, but I'm along for the ride and I'm enjoying it very much. And I'm done with this 3-hour epic Kagemusha, which translates to Shadow Warrior, which was a term used for people who would be used politically to be doubles of warlords and emperors and so on. And so the thief who becomes the double to the fallen Shingen is Kagemusha. What to say, what to say. There's a lot of opinions on the film. A lot of people hail this as one of Kurosawa's best. It's a masterpiece. Other people find it a little bit more underwhelming. I guess I'm just describing most films. Well, I guess not a lot of films get called masterpieces, but you know, for any film that gets called a masterpiece, there'll be people who think it's underwhelming. And you got to look at that word, masterpiece. It's a piece of art by a master of the craft, and Kurosawa is absolutely a master of his craft, making movies. I would say Kagemusha is a masterpiece, but I had a few problems with it. I think it's one of those films that is so visually incredible. I mean, I showed you a clip of one of those shots which are just stunning. And that's so many things. That's a dedication of getting the camera in the right spot and waiting for the sun to hit the right moment, and then having all the coordination, the choreography, and the costumes, and the smoke that funnels in. I mean, there's so many working elements at play to get a shot like that. It's incredibly impressive, and it fits the epic scope of this, 1500 set movie that's all about war and these big battles. But for all its visual majesty, this film has a majestical quality to it. My favourite part was the stuff just inside the palace in the second hour. It's that second hour to me that was the most enjoyable and captivating, when we see, and I don't think the thief is ever named, so we'll just keep calling him Kagemusha, when he is learning to become Shingen. And his brother, the brother of Lord Shingen, is the kind of spine of the movie. He's the guy who decides that, okay, my brother, wanted, because the Lord Shingen dies in the film, and he makes it his kind of last wish that, okay, and I don't know if I've already said that in an earlier clip, but he's like, make sure for 3 years no one knows that I've died. Use this new double we've got. And people are against it. Even the Kagemusha himself is against it, until he kind of is spirited to do this noble thing and to step into the shoes, literally. And what I love is that a lot of the people who are closest to him don't know that it's a double. So this guy Kagemusha, he has to convince Shingen's grandson that you're looking at your grandfather when you're not. And there's a great little scene where he's like, that's not my grandfather, and everyone's like, holy shit. And so, Kagemusha kind of wings it and kind of smooths things over, and they're like, well, he's been hurt from a battle, so he's a little bit different, even his mistresses, there's people he has to convince on a more intimate scale than also the people outside, the other clans. The other people want to fight this clan. And the idea is that Shingen's absence would be the key to any opposing clan to say, right, now they're vulnerable, now we can attack. So it's not just about defending the life of this man, and not letting anyone know that he died, but also defending, literally his kingdom, because the name value, it's almost like a big Hollywood celebrity in a movie. You put that in a film, it becomes so much more powerful, so much more bankable. Having that lord, that warlord Shingen at the helm of his kingdom, his castle, his palace, whatever you want to call it, gives it a name value and protects everyone within it, because people are afraid. And his kind of nickname is the Mountain. He's immovable, and that was his philosophy, that you don't move and you stay where you are and you kind of hunker down and you be defensive. So that's what they're kind of trying to do with this Kagemusha character, and he's introduced to some of the Lord Shingen's kind of closest kind of guards and pages and so on, and retainers. And I thought that would kind of develop more through the film, that we'd get to know these characters, they get to know this double. But after that initial setup, they weren't really in the film again. But that second hour, when he's kind of learning to be like him and doing all the ticks and everything, and figuring out how to maneuver himself through these situations where he doesn't know the answer, going out into battle, leading the troops to battle, and kind of having to sit there and hoping no one really calls him out on anything. And that stuff was great. There's a lot of things with all these characters and all these different clan bosses and warlords, or whatever you want to call them, and I wasn't sure what was going on for some of it. Now, this is a film where I think I'll listen to the audio commentary by Stephen Prince, who does really good audio commentaries, and I'll be like, so that, okay, yeah, that makes sense now. I feel like once I dive into this film, which I will absolutely do, I'll be able to understand more of the plot. I do think it's a problem that on first viewing, for me anyway, it was hard to discern everything. Now, I got the gist of it by the end of it. There was no big kind of question like, well what did that mean? No, it was very simple and clear-cut, but in this 3-hour movie, there's a lot of scenes with these other characters, and to Japanese audiences, it might be easier because they can hear the names and differentiate. And hear the names repeated and kind of link them to different parts of the story. But when you're reading all these Japanese names, some of them look very similar. And I'm like, wait, is that Nobu? Is that the same as... Is that... Okay, and now we're moving to the next scene. So I wasn't about to stop and kind of like do like a history lesson and kind of figure out a family tree of everyone. Because there was a son of Shingen, and then it seemed like he did know that it was a double, then he didn't. And then I thought, wait, is that a different character? Do they look similar? I don't know. So there's a few things that I didn't quite get, and I feel like that dragged the movie down just a little bit for me. And also, I feel like the Kagemusha character was so interesting that when it started to become more about the battles and stuff, and he became more secondary to the film, I lost a little bit of interest. But it really ends strong on this kind of message that just, you know, like most great war movies do, just shows you how pointless and insane it all is. And it really is this kind of this big kind of war-like ending that I thought was very effective, and it's something that would have ordinarily really annoyed me when you see all the dead horses and stuff, and there's just this, you know, just huge sea of thousands of extras, all these horses dead and stuff, and you know, usually when I see dead bodies in films and you can see that the neck's still going to breathe, and it's like, ah, damn. But in this one, I could see like the bellies of the horses, and I'm like, oh, phew, you know, clearly they've given the horses some stuff to make them go to sleep, and that was obvious because some of the horses are trying to get back up and they're kind of falling over again, and that kind of thing, just, you know, with the slow motion and the kind of the horn piece of music was so affecting, and it's really prolonged as well. It really sits on all of those fallen soldiers and the horses that were downed, and it's just really impactful, I thought. And the final shot of the film was just incredible, like both as a visual but also thematically, and also just symbolically as well. Like, I loved the last shot of the film. It's one of the kind of, I think, best endings I think I've seen to a film. Just very poetic, the way that last shot plays out, I thought, and then the credits just run over that lasting image. Brilliant stuff. This film is great, it really is, but 3 hours long, drags a little bit at times. I believe that there was an international version that was released worldwide, I guess, not in Japan, I'm not too sure, and some stuff was cut out, and so this version adds back in the other 18 minutes or so, including a scene with Takashi Shimura. That was so cool. I mean, he has barely nothing to do in the film, but he died a couple of years after this. This was his final film with Kurosawa. I think he even did more than Toshiro Mifune. One of my favorite actors of all time, and it was just great to see him here in a much later role than I'm accustomed to seeing him in, because I think that yeah, the latest film I'd probably seen him in was in the 60s, and this was 1980, so yeah, he's just awesome. And you know, he wasn't great in this because his part was so small, but it was awesome to see him. It was just like, oh yes, Takashi Shimura. And Tatsuya Nakadai was awesome, and he's another one of my favorite actors ever, and he was just brilliant in this. Kind of shades of the stuff he would go on to do in Ran, I think, with a lot of that stuff towards the end where he's just wide-eyed and almost just gone mad. And I liked how we did follow the Kagemusha character in the last, you know, 30 minutes of the film, because you could easily write that character out. It becomes more about the battle than him. He gets pushed way to the sideline, but we still follow him, and I liked that, because otherwise it would have felt a little light to me, because he's so integral to the film. He's there at the very first shot, which is like that 7-8 minute long take with the split screen and both Tatsuya Nakadai's, which was great. And now I know it was a different actor playing the brother and so on. There's some really good performances in the film, and as I said, the cinematography, just stellar, and some of the great locations they used. There's this scene, a couple of scenes actually, with these two characters. I think one of them was Lord Shingen's son. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was. And in the background, there's two windows basically, and the characters are standing there having a conversation. And the camera pans and shows you these two open windows, and out there are these snow-capped mountains, and then this kind of swishing lake, like just stunning, like natural beauty captured on film. And the colors, you know, some of the blood, it's like proper bright red, and Kurosawa really went wild with the colors. And oh my god, I almost forgot about the dream sequence, which was the highlight of the film, when Kagemusha is really getting inside his own head about the fact that he stepped into the shoes of Lord Shingen, and he has a dream where Shingen, in his kind of battle warlord warrior kind of outfit, bursts out of that kind kind of, what would you call it, I guess, the coffin jar that his body is kind of preserved in, that we see in the first hour of the film. And in his dream, Shingen bursts out of it in this multicolored dreamland. It's like there's these kind of, I don't know what you call them, mounds of dirt on the floor, very kind of almost like moon-like, and then in the background there's this weird abstract color splash across the whole background, and it just pans around. It's this huge set. There's a lot of slow motion and kind of weird cutting, and it just really felt dreamlike and unlike anything I'd seen before in a film. So, Kagemusha, I loved it, but I do think at times I was struggling a little bit with some of the plot and some of the other warlords, and so I mean there's some good stuff with that. Like there's we get to see the guy who shot Lord Shingen initially. That's when he first got injured, and so we kind of get that answered. And I like how we never saw him get shot, and we're following all the other clans going, oh yeah, apparently Shingen got shot dead, you know, and there's all these rumors going around, and we the viewer don't know either because we didn't get to see that scene. That was a brilliant piece of storytelling, because you could easily just show that he got shot, he wasn't killed, and you know, and then that tension's gone. You know what happens, but to kind of leave it 10-15 minutes and you see other people going, well, is he dead? Well, make sure he's dead, you know, and then they're sending out people to see if he's dead or not, and then they speak to the guy who had the gun, and they say, show us exactly what you did and where you shot it from and stuff, and I love all that stuff. So the first 2 hours I thought were great, and the third hour was good too, but particularly the scene where they go out to this big hill and there's a battle going on, and Kagemusha is sat on the hill and kind of not knowing what to do. And you could kind of tell this is where, I mean, the budget was obviously huge, and that's where George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola stepped in to funnel some more money into it. But you could tell in that sequence that they were kind of tricking it a little bit, because they're like, oh, enemy is coming from the left, enemy is coming from the right, and oh, turn the, you know, knock the torch out so that there's dark everywhere, and you can't see, you just hear like, oi, oi, you know, so you could tell that they're like, okay, we can't really show lots of people in this scene because we've already got that big sequence at the end, so that scene felt a little bit like, you know, the budget, you know. But they did have that cool shot with all the multicolored lights and stuff, and a lot of that multicolored lighting stuff is very abstract. The rainbow sky towards the end of the film, and it seems like that's what Kurosawa would do with these color films. He would kind of put in these moments of, you know, really just pushing the colors, which is really interesting. Not so much in Ran, from memory, and it feels very similar to Ran. It's almost like two companion films in a way. They feel very similar, but it's been 5 years now since I've seen Ran, so definitely going to get to that and review it as part of the Epic Film Challenge. It's in the book. And I think that's about all I have to say about it, I guess. Yeah, it's an epic. It really was an epic, and I definitely know I'm going to enjoy it the next time I watch it, because by that time I will watch the commentary, gone into special features, and I'll have more of a grasp on the plot. That's all I need really, is just to know a bit more about what's going on with some of the extracurricular scenes that don't involve, you know, Shingen's brother and Kagemusha himself. And I loved how he basically formed over like the year and a half that he was doubling the Lord. He kind of formed a nice bond with the grandson. You know, and he wanted to say goodbye to him. And typical Kurosawa scene when he gets kind of dismissed and it's raining, you know, just to reflect the mood of this character who had been through all this privilege, something that a lowly thief would, you know, it's just a completely different world. And he's kind of stepped into the shoes of this lord, like I said, and experienced this whole new world and this privilege, and then to have that taken away, and he goes and tries to see the grandson again because he had that connection. Anyway, loved it. I feel like there's something else I wanted to say about it, and I'm sure I could keep talking more and more about it. There's something to do with Ran, and it being kind of a companion piece to it, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering how it'll hold up, Ran, considering that it was 5 years ago that I saw it, and my opinion will probably change. Much like I feel like it'll change with this film as well. So, yeah, oh, another interesting piece of trivia that I just thought of is that Shintaro Katsu was meant to play Kagemusha and Shingen, and he's the guy who played Zatoichi in the Zatoichi Blind Swordsman series for 26 movies and the TV series and everything, and he's great. You know, I love Zatoichi, but that would have been a really interesting film. But apparently on the first day of filming they called it off. Shintaro Katsu did not work well with Kurosawa. He brought his own film crew on to film some shit, and they just didn't get on whatsoever. But I think Tatsuya Nakadai nailed it. He's just so awesome and was great in the film. funny and kind of heartbreaking at times. Like, he's just such a good emotive actor. He can be bold and brash and powerful, like say Toshiro Mifune, but he can be really more, sensitive and nuanced as well. So he was, I think, the perfect successor to Toshiro Mifune as that lead actor Kurosawa needed for these big films, because definitely you could see Mifune fitting into the role of Kagemusha 100%, and he would have been great. It's a shame they fell out and didn't make any more movies together, but Nakadai was the perfect, not even replacement, because he's on that level to me. Maybe not quite as great as Mifune, but, well, I don't know actually. I'd say he might even be a better actor than Mifune in some cases. Mifune's more memorable and more kind of, out there, but I think Nakadai might be. Look at Harakiri, Human Condition, he's amazing in that, so good in that. Anyway, yeah, you're getting bored now of me talking about Kurosawa. No, you're just crying because you like to cry and moan, even though you have a perfect life with food, water. So that's pretty much it, just food and water. Right, there we go. I'm going to take a shower now and then come back and talk about the next film. Okay, I took a shower and now I'm ready to watch the third film in this Kurosawa in Color marathon. And quite funnily enough, although it doesn't really make any difference whatsoever, but to me I find it quite cool for no other reason than I enjoy the aesthetic of the numbers kind of matching. We went from 1970 with Dodes'ka-den, 1980 with Kagemusha, and now we jump ahead another 10 years to 1990 with Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. This came out in the UK on Criterion as well. I believe this it is the UK Criterion. I wasn't sure for a second then, but yeah. I know nothing about this one, much like Dodes'ka-den. Well, I do know something about it. I know that it's supposedly based on Kurosawa's own dreams. And, at this point in his life, he would have been, what, 70, 80 years old? So, an aged Kurosawa making a movie just based on his dreams, I'm all in. I love the stuff that he's done with color films that I've seen so far in Ran, Dodes'ka-den, and Kagemusha, so I'm looking forward to this. In fact, I'm really looking forward to this because the menu alone just looks stunning. Like, the images that they're showing in the menu screen just seem so ethereal and otherworldly, and I'm kind of all in if this is all the movie is about, is just this awesome imagery, because it really is just striking. So I'm excited, I'm pumped for this film. This wasn't the last film he made two more after this before his death in the mid-90s, I believe. So I kind of feel like watching the rest of his, well, not the rest of his filmography, but the last two films that he made. It certainly would be within the realms of possibility, time-wise, for me to do that. It'd be a hell of a marathon to go through 5 of these movies when they're all so, quasi-long, but anyway, I'm going to go with this one. Really excited to watch Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. Good old Criterion. So this opening scene was preceded by a title card that said, "I had the following dream." So I'm wondering if these are literally just dreams that Kurosawa has had over his lifetime and decided to turn into movies, because that sounds really cool if that's the case. Regardless, I just need to start watching this thing. But also, the opening credits said that this was presented by Steven Spielberg, and also Martin Scorsese stars in this in one of the segments. So he really had a helping hand from some of the legends of American cinema from the the 80s and 90s for sure, with people like and 70s, of course, with Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Scorsese obviously starring in this. He's no actor, so just interesting really how he fell on hard times later on in his career, and he was really picked up and helped out by the guys who were so inspired by his work. It's kind of a cool thing. Anyway, on with the movie. I'm done. I'm finished with Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. What to say about this one? I feel a little bit, not disappointed, but downbeat, I suppose, because I was so excited to talk about this film. I was so amped up to start talking about this movie. But I'm kind of thinking ahead a little bit and thinking I might want to watch his last two films. And so I was just looking into the backstory of that for the tail end of this part of the video once I'm done talking about Dream, so I can say, hey, after this he made this film. And as it turned out, you know, this film came out in 1990. Spielberg convinced Warner Brothers to help produce it. That's how he got the money. Japan was not very willing to give him the money to make this film. And so, yeah, that's how that film came about. Even ILM, George Lucas's special effects company, helped out with the visual effects of this movie. And yeah, this premiered at Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival. Had a muted reception. Not a lot of people liked this very much, wasn't critically well received, and then his next two films even less so. In 1991 he did Rhapsody in August, in 1993 he did Madadayo, and that was his last film. And I assumed that given how much he kept on making films throughout the latter stages of his life, I assumed that he died around that period, 1993, 1994, just after releasing his last film, and just never got to make the next one. But it turns out he kept writing screenplays, he had loads more films planned, but in 1995 he fell and broke his back, which I never knew, and had to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair, and because of that he just never got to direct a film again, and he didn't get to fulfill his wish of dying on the set of shooting his next film. And in 1998 he passed away at the age of 88. And it just seems so sad that someone whose entire life was so consumed by making movies all the way almost until the end, for the last 5 years of it, he was, you know, planning films but could never do it. And that's just so heartbreaking to me. And seeing this film, I don't want to say I'm mad at myself because it's so trivial, you know, but I always kind of just assumed that his later films were just like, you know, an old man kind of who kept on doing his own thing. I mean, most directors, almost all of them, they have a shelf life. They have that golden period. No director really does all his best stuff at the very beginning, you know. Well, some do. But most great directors, they make a few good films to start with. The promise is shown, and then they just, when they hit their 30s, 40s, 50s, that kind of stage of their life, they crank out these masterpieces. And if they continue working after that, it starts to decline, and it happens to almost every director. Quentin Tarantino is a guy who wants to retire after his 10th film because he doesn't want to get to that stage. He wants to cut it off before he, you know, maybe makes films that don't hold up to his earlier stuff. And I'd seen Ran, and I thought that was fantastic, but I knew that he'd made more films after that. And I just, for some reason, they don't get talked about, that for one thing. People don't talk about Dreams all that much at all when they're talking about Kurosawa films. Nobody talks about Rhapsody in August, nobody talks about Madadayo. I've never heard anyone say anything about Dodes'ka-den. You know, Kagemusha, Ran, they get talked about. They get kind of put on this kind of, this pedestal as, you know, two films that are worthy of being in the Kurosawa masterpiece pantheon. Whereas the other films just don't really get talked about and mentioned that much. So I kind of assumed based on that, they weren't any good. And maybe to some people they aren't. But, and I haven't seen those last two films yet. And I almost feel like, for one thing, I loved this film so much that I feel like I should end here on a high note and make this Kurosawa in Color Marathon just a great kind of experience all around. If I watch his last two films, I could be bringing it down, but at the same time, I feel like I owe it to myself, and I owe it to Kurosawa in some way, to give those films a chance too, and to not just write them off, as I have been doing for many years. And obviously I was always going to get to them. I was always going to watch every film by Kurosawa, and I will do one day. I'm trying to savor them bit by bit, but I have been putting them on the back burner as just not really interested in those, you know. And again, I don't know much about either of those two last films, but yeah, it's just sad. It really is. But on the other hand, it is so fantastic. It is so fantastic that he managed to make, I think it's 30 films. That he had that period at the beginning of his career in his 30s where he could feel his way into the process of making his own movies, and then boom, Rashomon hit. He was off to the races, and you know, it's horrible that he really had to decline, but that people were able to step in, people like Spielberg, people like George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola, and give him that outlet to continue doing what he loved, to make movies. And it wasn't like he spent years before he made each film. There were all these projects he worked on in the 70s and 80s and things which fell through. There was Tora, which was this big thing he was working on, and he got very disappointed and disheartened by that, and I think that actually led to you know, some of his, you know, the darker periods of his life. Anyway, that's my whole spiel out of the way, I guess. I feel so conflicted now because, again, I was reading into his life and I just got really disheartened by hearing that final section of his life where he had to basically, for the last 6 months, just lie in bed and just watch TV and listen to music. And, well, I mean, you know, that's not the worst thing in the world to do, but at the same time, you know, as a guy who so clearly still wanted to make movies, still wanted to keep creating, you know, at the age of 79, 80, making this movie. That's fucking cool as far as I'm concerned. Let's talk about the movie itself. Oh man, I loved this so much. I absolutely adored it from start to finish. Again, like I said, I thought that it would be this case of, yeah, it's just this guy, you know, at the end of his career pretty much, just deciding to make this wild film about his dreams and just kind of basing it on the things that had been conjured up in his mind while he was asleep. And there's so much I could get into. I feel like I could talk about this film for an hour because dreams to me are so interesting, dreams are so exciting, dreams are so elusive, dreams are the unexplained. We don't really know all that much about them and how they work and why they exist and all that kind of stuff. You know, I can remember dreams I had when I was a kid. I can remember dreams I had, you know, a week ago. I can remember dreams I had years ago. And it's like there's this construct inside my brain that exists, that lives, that breathes when I'm not awake. I was thinking about this on the bus yesterday, just randomly, without even thinking about this film at all in any way, shape or form. I was thinking about how I have my own version sometimes, and it changes all the time, but there is this almost set version of my hometown and home city in my brain, in my dreams, that I keep returning to. There are similar kind of setups, similar locations, you know, and I kind of revisit them from time to time throughout my life. It's like this weird dream version of my hometown, and I remember bits about it. It's almost like it's a real place, you know. And we have these abstract dreams, but we have these dreams that feel very real at the same time. And I'm someone who dreams a lot, almost nightly. Well, I guess we all dream every night, but I remember my dreams a lot, and very vividly too, and they go on for so long. Anyway, so the idea of taking your dreams and transposing them into a feature film, I really like, and you could easily take all 8 of the segments of this that make up this film, and you could make them as short films, and they would work as short films, very much so, and they'd be very strong short films, I feel like. But as someone who I love the form of a feature-length movie. We have different forms of visual entertainment when it comes to filming things. We have TV shows, music videos, episodic stuff, movies, feature-length, and so on. And it would be nice, you know, sure, if he had never made this film, but he made those 8 short films and they came out on Blu-ray, and it would be like a cool little collection, and you could watch through them one by one. But to have it in a feature film as this kind of construct is really cool. And I would have been fine if they didn't link, I would have been fine if they didn't really have much to say. Just the visual wonder of it was fine by me. That's all I was really hoping for in this film. I didn't have my expectations too high. But man, my expectations were shattered because not only did this have something to say on many different things, but it told this story, I felt like. And often with these abstract kind of films where you don't have this narrative arc, and that was me putting some moisturizing cream on my hands, by the way. I have eczema, so my skin gets dry, especially after a shower, the few hours after I've had a shower, and so I need to moisturize my hands before I go crazy. Anyway, just felt like I need to explain that because I leant off camera and you just hear this kind of it's weird. So yeah, I'm gonna leave that in. Screw it. Yes, dreams. The construct of it, I think, works because where we go is like through this man's life in a way, because we start with 2 segments where, and it's basically, I didn't even realize this until halfway through the film, we're really seeing Kurosawa in this movie, because in the second half of the film, the male character who is experiencing these dreams wears this very specific hat that you'll see Kurosawa wearing in most of the behind-the-scenes pictures of his great films, back to Seven Samurai and so on. This kind of, I don't know what it's called, but I'll try and get an image of it up on screen for you. That kind of hat that, if you've seen a lot of behind-the-scenes pictures, you'll have seen Kurosawa wearing that kind of hat a lot. So as soon as I saw the main character in the film wearing that in the last segments of the movie, I thought, this is supposed to be Kurosawa himself. And that actor who played the adult Kurosawa I thought was great. But we also see him as a child, as a very young child, and then a slightly older child. And so we follow the dreams, and we go through from childhood to adulthood. We don't get that kind of adolescence interim, but nevertheless, we get these different perspectives and these different feelings, and it celebrates imagination, and it condemns humanity, it condemns war, and at the end it celebrates life. It really, it tells this story to me, it really does. At the beginning we're playing with the imagination of youth, and then we get to the darker stuff about persevering through life and life's struggles and the harsh realities of life as an adult, and then the horrors of war. And then the horrors of science and the horrors of mankind just being too greedy for its own good. And apparently that was a lot of the reason, a lot of the reasoning for Japan not to be too keen to fund this film for Kurosawa, because this film very much criticizes nuclear power. There was some kind of political thing that Kurosawa figured was the reason that they wouldn't put up the money for this film, and why he had to turn to Spielberg and Warner Brothers to get this film made. I don't know if it was a touchy subject at this time, but nevertheless, the fear of atomic energy and the atom bomb and nuclear war, nuclear fallout is so huge in this film in two particular segments. And yeah, so I'm just going to get into the film. There are eight kind of segments, and I'll try and just talk about all of them. Why not? This is a marathon. I'm going to marathon through my thoughts on the film. I've got so much to say about it. I'm so fucking excited that I watched this film and I loved it so much. It blew me away, and I love that when you're not expecting too much from a film. Yeah, and this is definitely my favourite Kurosawa film from his colour period so far. I think Ran is probably a better film overall, but even Kagemusha to an extent, but this just, it clicked with me. It really did, and I'm so intrigued with dreams to begin with, and I just love the idea of dreams being the catalyst for making a movie. And you could take any of the short films in this and maybe even turn them into a feature, I think, but maybe they wouldn't work. Maybe you'd really have to put a lot of work into taking that initial idea, the germ of an idea, then expanding it into a feature film. But I feel like what it does is it takes the most memorable scene of each of these 8 fictional films and puts them all into one movie. You know, you could have a film that's all about this kind of nuclear fallout and the demons that are created from that, but if you just take the one memorable scene where a human finds out all of this stuff, that's the coolest part, you know? Or if you take a movie about these mountaineers climbing up to this mountain and getting caught in a blizzard, that blizzard scene was so memorable in the middle of the film, that you take that and you put it into this one, if you understand what I'm talking about. And I think that that really works. And the film does take its time. There are these slow passages, but they're dreamy at the same time, which I didn't even think about. Very appropriate, obviously. And you can play around a lot with that. Like I said in that clip when I was halfway through watching the film, it's so easy to make a film like this where you go too abstract. You go too far and it doesn't make too much sense, and dreams don't make sense a lot of the time. And he really could have easily gone to that thing where you're looking at someone and suddenly they change into someone else. That happens a lot in dreams. We feel like we know the person that's standing in front of us, even if they look completely different. There's loads of things that happen in dreams that just become a part of the dream logic, and he didn't toy around with that too much. A little bit, but not too much. And so he takes basically the cool idea of, oh, let's turn my dream into a film. He does that, but he also kind of hones it into something that is cohesive, is understandable, and tells a story. I'm sure that these aren't the literal dreams of Kurosawa. He's fine-tuned them, and apparently this was the first film he wrote entirely himself since The Man Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail, which he made before Rashomon, way back in, I think, 1949, he made that film, or at least in the late 40s. So, you know, that was a huge gap, 40-year gap, 45 years even, maybe, before he wrote this film by himself. I guess he would collaborate with other people, or other people would write his films, I'm not too sure on all of that stuff from all of his films through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm not sure who wrote all those films, but I'm pretty sure he had a hand in a lot of them, and this one he wrote completely himself. But you have to kind of tune those ideas into something that makes a good film, and I think this is a really good film. Maybe even a masterpiece. I think that it so exceeds in everything that it's trying to do. So alright, let's get into it. The first segment of the film, Sunshine Through the Rain, I believe it was called. Can't remember the names of all of them. And we have this very young boy, and actually, I love this detail. He's outside his house, and there's like a little garden and a gate, and there's a mother there, and it was modelled on his actual childhood home. It even says Kurosawa somewhere on a plaque, apparently. So that's really cool. And it's raining, but it's sunny, and he says to the mother, why is it raining if the sun's out? She's like, well, this is when foxes have weddings. They're embarrassed, they don't want people to see them get married, so this is when it happens. You know, they want to have a nice sunny day, but if it's raining, no one will bother them. But don't you go anywhere else because you're supposed to stay in. So he goes into the forest, and sees this kind of fox wedding happening, and then it's kind of personified by these humans with whiskers and stuff, and he sees something that he shouldn't, and then his mother tells him to go and kind of apologize to the foxes for having witnessed this sacred event, and that they live underneath the rainbow. And we see this beautiful image of the boy standing underneath the rainbow. That's all the first one is, and to me that's kind of again, the imagination of youth and how that plays into the life of a child. The second one, the peach orchard, is about a boy who goes out and is kind of lured by this young girl who doesn't exist, maybe not, to this kind of hilltop where all these people in these very extravagant kind of old style Japanese outfits, their faces all painted white, very elaborate robes, and they call themselves dolls, and they say that they are the personification of the peach trees that used to be there in that orchard but were cut down. And the young boy is saying, he was really sad that the peach trees got cut down. He convinces these dolls that he really cared about the peach trees, and so they do this kind of performance, and it's this again, very traditional style Japanese thing where they're playing instruments and stuff, and these kind of blossoms start flowing into the scene, and it's very ethereal, very dreamlike, and eventually they transform into this peach orchard. And that one was just so, again, dreamlike, but beautiful in its own way. And the young boy who played the young boy, I thought was really good at being emotional in that scene. The third one, we move on to a much harsher reality, where, well, not even a reality, a harsher unreality, where a group of mountaineers are hiking through this blizzard in a snow-capped mountain. It's called The Blizzard, that sequence. And I like how in between every sequence we have just a title card saying, "I had another dream." And I was kind of hoping at the end it would say, "I had one more dream," but it didn't. And this one is very lengthy, just almost all in slow motion of these mountaineers just kind of trudging their way through the snow. It's just so perfectly realized. The imagery in this scene, it's just astounding, and it's obviously to do with the cinematographers, to do with the production designers, the art designers, all the people who made that imagery possible. But Kurosawa is the guy who has the vision to want to get that stuff and to be able to put it together in a way that creates this scene, creates this reality within the unreality of being a dream. And this guy, he kind of collapses in the snow, and this woman appears, and maybe it could be his sweetheart back home, who knows, but she kind of begins to cover him in these weird blankets to keep him warm, and she says in a very weird voice that's kind of just dark and kind of completely contrasts the beautiful look of her face and her kind of sweet demeanor. The voice doesn't match the face, and it gives it that weird quality, and she says that the snow is warm, the ice is hot, and she starts covering him with these blankets. And that scene, I won't kind of spoil where it goes from there, but it's just so haunting, and again, something so beautiful about these images that he's putting into the dreams, which you can have in dreams. And think about how I'm sorry, I'm getting so amped up. Think about how dreams influence art. They're so huge on influencing art and the things that we think about, the things that we create inside our head, even if they are coming from different sources. I think of Twin Peaks, that just came out with a new season this year, and dreams are a huge part of the Twin Peaks kind of lore. Dating back to the original series and even the movie. Dreams are so integral to the storytelling of that. And then we have the Terminator, which was literally born out of this this fever dream that James Cameron had. I believe he was in Italy, he was sick, he had this nightmare about the Terminator, and he woke up and started drawing and stuff. So I love how that kind of comes into art making and so on, and just so endlessly fascinated with how dreams work and what they mean, if they mean anything, and what we can learn about ourselves from them. Anyway, so that was the third one, The Blizzard, which I thought was really good. The fourth one, I think, was The Tunnel. And The Tunnel was this very slow pace to start with sequence where a man who's walking back from war, as we can tell by the clothes he's wearing, and he walks into this tunnel and he sees a dog outside. I'll leave the dog stuff because it's there for a reason. But the main meat of it is when he walks into this tunnel, and I started to nod off a little bit. And you kind of nod off for a few seconds and it feels like a minute, so I kept rewinding the film. But I nodded off for a few seconds, and as I woke up he was leaving the tunnel. I thought, did I miss like a whole part of the film or something? But I hadn't. It was just he walked through the tunnel, he gets to the other side, and he turns around and a man comes out of the tunnel from where he just had walked, and it's this soldier, and his face is all white and the black kind of makeup around his eyes, and it's his fallen comrade from war. and it's an incredibly moving sequence where he's confronted with his fellow soldier who died, and the guilt he has that he survived. And he basically convinces his old friend to basically, you know, to move on and to go back through that tunnel and to rest in peace. And then he's confronted with his entire platoon, who all march out of the tunnel to greet him. The performance he gives in this scene almost moved me to tears. You know, the horrors of war are just something that are so unimaginable to me, and I always feel so incredibly lucky that I haven't been yet in an era where people get drafted, you know, where people have to go to war, where there is no choice, and you know, people just die. And I think one of the lines is that people in war die like dogs, you know. And that scene was just, again, so moving to me, and such a haunting little story in of itself. And this is where we get into the really serious part of the film, where adult life gets thrown in your face in a big bad way, and the most severe version of adult life, which is war and is death and all that stuff that humanity has brought upon itself, you know. The next sequence is the Van Gogh sequence, which I talked about, and it was just, it was a nice departure from the earlier two segments, particularly the tunnel sequence, where we get a bit of a breather from the heavy stuff, which I felt was perfectly placed, and we see this painter, or I guess it is Kurosawa in fact, and Kurosawa was a painter. You know, he did artwork and so on and so forth, and maybe, I think that is probably one of Kurosawa's images himself. Oh, there's a picture of him there, on the set of directing the film, it looks like. Let's see if he had that. I feel sure that there must be something in the booklet of his drawings or paintings or artwork, and there isn't. This is an image of the tunnel sequence. I probably put it on screen already, but there you go. There's the soldier being confronted by his entire platoon outside the tunnel, which was just, whew, yeah, just big time kind of, you know, catching me in the heart stuff. I think it's a very slow sequence. It's not like the whole scene was moving, but by the end of it, when he very emotionally tells them to kind of march back on and to kind of move on to the next, you know, phase of death, you know, that was the part that really got me. You know, was this guy who took full responsibility for his, you know, his part in their death, and you wouldn't want to be in that situation, you know, where people had died on your watch. Anyway. So the Van Gogh sequence, where we have Martin Scorsese inexplicably speaking in his thick American accent as Van Gogh, and just talking very briefly about his process of painting and so on. And I thought that scene was really cool. And I said at some point, I think that he's no actor, but he's pretty damn good in this, I have to say. I really liked him in the film. And being a dream, it really didn't matter that he spoke English. And he leaves across the field, and Kurosawa follows him, and then suddenly Kurosawa is in the paintings, and this very elaborate sequence where he's literally walking through the literal paintings of Van Gogh, which I think that those scenes would have looked even better if, and now I might be getting this wrong, but it looked like it was done on video. The motion of the man walking through the paintings looked very video-esque to me. So I have a feeling that that special effects sequence was done on video, and as such it didn't look as good. I might be wrong with that though. So that kind of threw me off a little bit. And there are, I have to say, even though ILM worked on the film, there's a couple of special effects in the film that are a little rough around the edges. Some of the matte paintings, the lines really show, and it's kind of like, ooh, what's a shame. You know, that's really the only criticism I have of the film, is that a couple of the special effects shots are not quite up to scratch. But apart from that, the mood and the atmosphere that is achieved through the special effects, through the color use in the film, the color design of the film. You know, that Van Gogh sequence with the bridge, where all the bricks on the bridge are just painted these vivid, bright colors. It just pops so much. And I just laugh almost, because it's like Kurosawa's like, okay, I'm going to make a few more films in my career. I'm going to do them in color, but I'm going to do them in color. You know, I think I even said that in an earlier part of this video. Like, he went all out with the color in this film, and I loved it. Well, not completely. I mean, you look at the tunnel. Not a lot of color in that sequence, you know, and but just when he gets to it big time. But color is so important in this film. So the Van Gogh sequence I enjoyed very much. It was a very cool kind of rumination on art, you know, in some ways, and I thought it was very well done, and a great kind of ode to Van Gogh in some ways. Now, what would it be? The sixth sequence of the film. Mount Fuji in red. I feel like Mount Fuji in red and the Weeping Demon, the 7th segment, they're kind of like Kurosawa's horror film. Kurosawa's horror film on nuclear energy, nuclear power, the nuclear bomb, you know. Whew. And I tell you what, the Mount Fuji in red might be the most provocative installment in the entire film, because I was so drawn into it, because it felt like my own dreams. I felt like I had this connection with Kurosawa because it's what I dream about. I constantly dream about, you know, the end game, Doomsday. You know, I constantly dream about these scenarios in which you're about to die. Something has gone bad, someone has fucked up, and you're about to go down in flames. Literally, last night or the night before, I had a dream where these planes were flying in right towards my house. And I was like, oh my god, we're going to die. And I thought, okay, no, it's just planes. But the planes were spraying gasoline. And then suddenly everything started to explode. And it was just this horror. Like, oh, it got me in my chest inside the dream. When I woke up and I was so thankful to be alive. And this sequence just totally embodied that, where you have all these people running around, the whole scene is kind of bathed in red, people are screaming, there's smoke going on, and Kurosawa's there and he's looking up at Mount Fuji. Explosions going off everywhere, the mountain begins to turn red, the snow-capped peaks begin to melt and turn to red, and the thing turns into this raging inferno. It's just pure nightmare fuel. And again, some of the special effects maybe not perfect, but it evoked that feeling that I've had in so many dreams where you just picture that end of days scenario. And they're like, this is Japan, you know, we've got nowhere to go. And someone says, is Fuji erupting? And a man says, no, the nuclear power plants have gone. They're all going up, all 6 of them. You know, we need to get to water, you know, but there still won't be enough time. And then we follow them to the ends of, you know, Japan, basically. They end up by the sea, and there's all this stuff strewn around, people's belongings, and everyone's gone except for these 3 last characters. And Kurosawa says, where is everyone? And the old man says, well, the middle-aged man says, they've all jumped into the sea. You know, they'd rather take that out than wait for the radiation to get them. And they look out, and the radiation is coming in. And he says that red stuff, that's plutonium minus 239, you know. 1/1,000,000th of a gram of that will give you instant cancer. That purple stuff, you know, once it gets to your bones, it gives you leukemia. You know, and he talks about, you know, all that stuff and how radiation is so dangerous because you can't see it. And then they decided to dye it so that you could tell that it was coming, but all it does is tell you when you're going to die. And just this horror, you know, of being stuck on this almost cliff top with the sea behind you, and it's like, right, do you want to drown to death, or do you want to wait for radiation poisoning to slowly kill you? It's just such a commentary on the nuclear fear, you know, and the why mankind has done this to itself. Just very effective, very effective. Then the 7th sequence is the Weeping Demon, where we follow Kurosawa through this wasteland, this literal just apocalyptic landscape, and he comes across this demon. This wide-eyed man who's scraggly, his clothes are in tatters, and he has a horn in the middle of his head. And he explains how he is this mutation from nuclear radiation. And this amazing scene, which is a 7-minute long take, it felt like it was 20. We opened with a shot on this kind of desolate mountainside, and we see these dandelions, tampopo, as they call them. I just watched a film called Tampopo, which is kind of funny. So when they said tampopo, I knew that you meant dandelion. And we see these dandelions, it just looks like normal dandelions on a hillside. Then the characters walk in, you see that these dandelions are like 15 feet in the air. And they've put them, they're there for real. These aren't, well, they're special effects, but they're practical. So that scene was so memorable, where the demon and Kurosawa, they walk across this kind of sparse, we couldn't even call it a dandelion field, but this kind of area. And they sit down, and the demon explains what's going on and how all the demons are eating each other. And the demons with 2 horns are more powerful than the other ones, and says that the people of humanity who were kind of the big bad businessmen, the cunning and the deceptive, you know, they have power here too in the demon world, but they're just the same as all of us, and they're all going to get eaten in the end. And then he shows Kurosawa all the other demons kind of just howling in pain and misery, and the bones of the other demons that they've eaten. It's just this pure, again, nightmare fuel. It's just this incredible creation And that dandelion sequence, which is this, again, 7-minute take when the camera pans along and they sit down underneath these dandelions, that was an incredibly memorable scene, both from the performance of the guy who plays the demon, and even the guy who plays Kurosawa and kind of is sitting there just reacting to this monologue. He does a very good job of reacting appropriately, I thought. But also this beautiful yet horrible image of these huge mutated dandelions and kind of the fog behind them. It's so beautifully composed, and the framing of this film is just next level. You know, it's so well put together, which, you know, you shouldn't be surprised at with the Kurosawa film. And the Blu-ray just fell onto the chair and it scared Lily. So, and I just noticed I've been talking for over half an hour on this one film. This is going to be a bumper video, obviously. So the final sequence, oh man, the final sequence, the village of the windmills, I think it was called. The windmill? Is it windmill or watermill? The village of the watermills. Yes. This was just such a great ending. You know, you go through the imagination of a child and the dreams of a child. I'm not sure if they were dreams he had when he was a child, or dreams where he dreamed himself being a child. Like, I think it applies in both instances. It's about the imagination of a kid. And then you get the more harsher stuff with the adult timeline, I suppose, and again, the stuff about war and nuclear fallout and the fear of kind of an apocalypse and what we've done to our world. And then we end on such an unbelievably, almost sickly sweet kind of upbeat, optimistic edge with Kurosawa walking into this village of the watermills, and it's just this beautiful little sequence where he walks along these boardwalks across this flowing stream. There's colourful flowers everywhere, and he meets this old man, sits down and has this lengthy chat with him and says, you know, what's this place called? Oh, we don't call it anything, it's just called the village, you know. But people outside it call it the village of the watermills. And he says, well, you know, don't you have electricity? And the old man's like, no, we don't have electricity. We do things the old way because, you know, we feel like technology. Well, he didn't say this in exact words, but the idea is that, you know, technology has kind of dulled humanity in a lot of ways, and how people want for convenience more than anything, and so things get lost along the way. And the more natural way of life is a much better way of life, and I think there is so much to that. I really do. And it's this scene that still rings true today. I mean, it rang true in 1990 for sure, especially in that period where things were really changing in terms of technology. But even now, 2017, it really rings true as this kind of commentary on, you know, sometimes simpler is better, and, you know, natural is definitely better than the way that we've taken things. And, you know, I enjoy modern life, you know, I'll be honest, it's the way it is, but I do kind of, in a way, kind of pine for a different way of living, where we do things in a much more clean way. The character of the old man says that, you know, all you really need is clean air and clean water, you know, and trees and grass give us that. And, you know, it's just so simple. And the guy who plays that old man, and I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I think I am, it looks just like him, is the old man from Tokyo Story, if you've seen that movie. And so he was in his late 80s when he made this film. He died a few years later. I had no idea he worked with Kurosawa at all, and he was so brilliant in that last scene. But also the guy who plays Kurosawa, I have to give him credit, because in the scenes that he has to react with fear to all these things, but also in this final sequence he has to react with wonder and joy. And he did it so well, and the whole scene was so nice, that it moved me. It really did. I almost cried, just even the credits rolling. There was something so beautiful about it, and I just loved how he structured the film. Dreams, they encompass all the emotions. We go through sadness in dreams, we go through happiness, we go through passion, we go through all these things, and he showed all of that in this, except for passion, you know. Those kind of dreams that we have, he didn't delve into, which I think is very appropriate for the film, and it didn't need to be there, and I think in other directors' hands it would have probably been a big part of the film, and I think it would have suffered for that. But he goes through the, you know, again, wonder of imagination, optimism, but also nihilistic stuff at the same time, the real kind of deep down primal fears that we have, and showing that in the dreams. And then finally we end with kind of just a real nice dream, and a nice note to end on. I think it was so kind of uplifting after everything, and it took me through many different emotions, and I just love that final sequence so much. I want to watch it again and again. I got so much out of it, I really did. And there's a fantastic line at the end when the old man says that, you know, People these days, they say that life is hard, and I think that's a lot of old talk. Life is pretty good, and in fact it's quite exciting. And then off he walks, and there's a funeral going on, and instead of being this very dour occasion, it's this celebration of the end of someone's life who lived to be 99 and had a full natural life and so on. And yeah, it's definitely, you know, pushing it over the edge a little bit in terms of the nice, happy, you know, yeah, we live all natural and we live until we're 100 and so on, and everything's nice and fine here. Obviously that's an unrealistic kind of reality, but it is a dream at the same time, and it just taps into that kind of thing where sometimes we can just enjoy life if we have the means to. Obviously we go through horrible things, but if we're not going through things that aren't that horrible, and maybe you're just kind of plodding along through life, maybe you're stuck in a rut and you feel down about things, it's nothing too dramatic, but you just feel sometimes just going outside and just appreciating the world that you live in and the life that you have and the possibilities that are there, that's the kind of feeling that this last segment of the film evokes to me, and it's one that I like to remind myself of from time to time. So I loved it. 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. One of my favourite Kurosawa films for sure, and I really didn't think I would say that. I really didn't think I would feel that, but I felt it. I felt this film, and I loved it in its totality. I thought it was brilliant. It had the funny moments, but mainly, I mean, you know, it isn't that well balanced. You know, a lot of it is this kind of really stark, kind of, again, nihilistic stuff, and I love how it comes full circle at the end, and it's like life, you know, where we start kind of optimistic, and hopefully towards the end we can have this optimistic outlook too, but in the middle as an adult things get a little dark there, you know. So I know it felt like this life cycle of a movie. So man, loved it. Kurosawa's Dreams, can't recommend it enough. And you know what, I am so excited because there's a 2.5 hour making of documentary on this, which I believe is like got on set stuff. So yeah, shot on set, like, cannot wait to check that out. I'm so excited for that alone. So yeah, I feel like this should be the end of it. But I tell you what, I want to continue. I really do want to continue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get his next film from 1991, Rhapsody in August, and I'm going to check it out and continue this Kurosawa in colour marathon. Why not, eh? Why not go all out, balls to the wall? These last two films might be disappointing in comparison to this and Kagemusha, but at least I've seen them, and I feel like I need to kind of see it through until the end now. I feel like I've come far along enough in Kurosawa's late career, 1970, 1980, 1990. We've gone in very round decade kind of numbers, but now I think I should check out his final two films and see what I think of them. And if I'm lucky, I'll get half the feeling I got out of this film from those two. So my expectations are still pretty low. I'm not going to try and deceive myself into thinking I'm going to have the same experience as I did with this. But regardless, this has been such a revelation to me, because again, maybe it is just the fact that I wasn't expecting much. Maybe when I watch this again I'll think, it's pretty good, but it's not as good as it was the first time. That's definitely a possibility, you know, but right now, it's everything, you know, and I love that feeling when, in the moment, the film is just so good, and when it's done, you're just like, yeah, fuck yeah, you know, I love it. Anyway, so I'm going to go get Rhapsody in August ready. My uncle Don Lode has helped me out with that one. Madadayo, his final film, is on Filmstruck, so I got that one ready to go. So I'm going to get some stuff ready, probably get a drink and a snack, and then I'll continue on. It's getting a little bit late, but who cares? It's Kurosawa, and I'm going to finish this thing. Alright, Uncle Don came through. I have Rhapsody in August ready to watch right now. Got some post-dinner snacks, got my typical Coca-Cola and Fireball whiskey combination ready, and some various chocolatey treats down there. This is kind of a lemon, chewy, sweet thingy. Oh, and as an aside, I didn't even think about this, but I think I said at some point, I didn't like the cover very much, and felt like maybe after seeing the film, I would like it a bit better. And I can say that I still don't think it's that good of a cover. I get the whole Shadow Warrior thing, but I think that considering how bold and incredible the visuals of this film can be at times, I think that the cover's a little lacking. Whereas this one, I think, is quite beautiful for Dreams. Simple, understated, and centered, I'm assuming, on one of Kurosawa's paintings. It looks very much like his style. So anyway, I'm going to check out Rhapsody in August, see what I think. So Chico presents. So obviously he got some kind of Japanese funding to make this film, which is interesting. In fact, I think this was the first film he made in Japan in quite a while. I'm not too sure. I read something about that, but then he clearly shot Kagemusha and Ran in Japan. And Dreams, I'm assuming. I don't know. Maybe it's just the first film that was funded by a Japanese company in a very long time. I don't know. Anyway, on we go. I seem to be starting a lot of these clips with just trying to find a different way of going. Okay, alright, so just finished this movie. And I finished Rhapsody in August, and I'm all wrapped up in my blanket here. Got my pillow as well. I'm getting kind of hunkered down for the night. It is way into the early hours of the morning. Definitely a time to go to bed right now. But I'm going to power on, and I'm going to watch Kurosawa's final film. Let's see this thing through until the bitter end, though I hope it's not too bitter. We'll see. But before we get to that, Rhapsody in August, what did I think about it? I loved it. I really thought it was a really good film. Again, basically what I do with every film I watch is I log it on Letterboxd, put in the date that I watched it, and rate it out of 5. This one I gave 4.5 out of 5. And I checked to see if any of my friends had seen it, what they thought, and a lot of them thought it was very middle of the road, down there 3 out of 5. I guess I can understand that, and it seemed like I'm in the minority as far as everyone who's watched it on Letterboxd. So kind of the general audience opinion is around 2.5 to 3 out of 5. And I was in the very small minority who rated it 4.5 out of 5. There's more that rated it 5 out of 5, but yeah, so it's just interesting to see the different opinions and so on. And it was kind of the same with Dreams as well. So this film that wasn't received all that well, it was seen actually quite controversially in America because it was seen to be an anti-American film. It was seen to be a film that blames America for the stuff that happened in World War II. And so on, and I can kind of see where that could come from, but I think that it's a little bit silly because not every single line of dialogue that comes from every single character in a film is indicative of the director's opinion. It's a character, but also I don't really think it's about that. I don't think it is anti-American. I mean, you look at what happens in the film. I mean, it's very clear to me. So it just goes to show it's not just 2017 with people overreacting and kind of making a big deal out of something that shouldn't really be extrapolated, I don't think. Anyway, the story itself is it's not complicated, but the characters within the film are quite complicated, and I'm not even fully sure myself as to who goes where in one sense, and I'll get to that when I get to the characters. Let's just do it now. The main character, and it's set in present day 1990 Japan. Although the film came out in 1991, it's set in 1990 because there's a very specific date in the film, which is August 9th, 1990, the anniversary of the bomb being dropped on Nagasaki, and that's where the film is set, in the countryside of Nagasaki, outside of the city, where a grandmother lives. So we'll just call the grandmother the main character of the film, and for the summer she is taking care of her 4 grandchildren. There's an older teenage boy, an older teenage girl, slightly younger teenage girl, and then a young boy. And 2 of them are from another, parent, and 2 of them are from another. So I guess there's a group of cousins and brothers and sisters, but I wasn't sure who was really brother and who was really sister. And when the parents come into the film halfway through, I wasn't sure who was who. Like, is that the child of grandma, or is that the partner of the child? I really wasn't sure. It doesn't make it that clear for you. Maybe if you're Japanese, the way they address each other could clue you into some of that stuff. They kind of address it towards the end, but it felt a bit too late to me as far as getting to know who goes where in the family tree of these characters. But the essence of it is that the grandmother's children have gone off to Hawaii to visit their long-lost uncle. And grandma doesn't remember this long-lost uncle. She doesn't remember this older brother that she apparently has. But she also explains that she had 11, at least, brothers and sisters, and some of them she didn't even remember because there were a lot of them, and some of them went in different directions and so on. And this was one who went to Hawaii in 1920, I believe they said. So she never kind of really knew him that much. And her long-lost brother, the children's long-lost uncle, has supposedly started this all-American family in Hawaii. He has American kids and so on, one of those being a guy called Clark, played by Richard Gere. what the hell? Like, this is at the height of his fame, really. I mean, Pretty Woman was just a couple of years before this. Richard Gere was huge at this point in time. It's not like it was something he did before he kind of broke into the big time. Apparently, Richard Gere was such a fan of Kurosawa, he said he'd do the movie for free, which is awesome. But of course, you know, Japanese people being as, you know, super respectful as they are, there was no way that was happening. So he was paid a little bit, but also they flew him in and stuff. They flew in any friends he wanted to come to Japan and visit and so on, and apparently he learned all of his Japanese lines phonetically, so without really learning the language, but kind of getting a hold of some broken Japanese, I suppose you could say, and also doing his own lines, not getting someone to dub it over later. I thought he did very good, but we'll get to him in just a second. So yeah, it's a bit complicated, but it, you know, it deals with the, not really the fallout, but the lingering effects of the Nagasaki bomb that was dropped in Japan in 1945. The grandmother, she has kind of a big bald patch on the back of her head because she went looking for her husband the day the bomb was dropped, or the day after the bomb was dropped. Her husband was killed with the atom bomb, and going to look for him, it burnt some of her hair off. So she's one of those survivors, basically, of the radiation poisoning and all that kind of thing. And clearly with Dreams, where there was those two segments of the film that were very nuclear kind of war related, clearly this is something that was weighing heavily on Kurosawa's mind at the time in his old age, and must have at the time, because he lived through those days and those horrible times. But you know, it becomes apparent that he hadn't forgotten those things at all by the time he got to the end of his life. Not that you'd forget it, but you know, it was still something he wanted to make a point of talking about and making a film about, because it's touched on in Dreams. Here the whole movie's about it. The whole movie is about the fact that this grandmother, she has this brother who she never really knew, and his family is American, and they don't know that her husband died in the bomb, and that makes it kind of awkward, you know. So when letters get sent back and forth, this American family, they find this out for the first time, and so Clark, Richard Gere's character, he comes over straight away because he feels horrible about this, and he wants to kind of make amends, I suppose, and try to build a bridge to his newfound aunt, I suppose. So he comes and visits the grandmother and the kids and so on, and their parents. And when their parents come back from Hawaii, they're very kind of, oh, this is great, you know, we got this long lost uncle and he's rich, he owns this farm on Hawaii, and they're very greedy about that. And so you kind of see the pitfalls of greed, I suppose, and how that kind of can turn people very ugly if it presents itself in that way, where, you know, you're trying to take advantage of a situation rather than looking at the person, but looking at what you can get out of them. So that was an interesting part of where the parents really had to learn how greedy they were being at some point. But I mean, it's kind of funny at some points in the film, you know, because it's this pineapple farm, and at one point one of the dads is kind of wearing this pineapple farm logo T-shirt, and it's just like, oh, for fuck's sake, like, you know, just shameless, you know. More concerned with that than they are with you know, the fallout of this revelation that, you know, this woman's husband had died during the bomb. The bomb was dropped by Americans, and so it makes it a bit awkward between this newfound extension of the family, which is primarily American. So I hope I've made sense with that kind of summary of the film in that sense. I liked the kids. The youngest boy was played by the boy who is in the Peach Orchard segment of Dreams, and I thought he was really good in that segment. He wasn't great. Well, he was great in parts, but you could kind of tell when he was acting, but he did a really good job of kind of conveying what he needed to. So I'm not surprised that Kurosawa brought him back for this film, and he was really good here too. The kids are really good for the most part. There's a couple of scenes that feel a little bit stagey, you know, but apart from that, I really enjoyed those characters and the relationship they had with their grandmother. I liked how it was a little bit different at times, you know. They'd kind of, you know, criticize her cooking, which is kind of heartbreaking, but, you know, they acted like kids. They felt like real kids, and I loved their relationship with their grandmother. They'd sit there on the porch of this beautiful house, looking at the moonlight in the evening. That was another thing I loved about the film, was the location. This kind of very traditional Japanese house in the middle of the countryside in the mountains, and you're always hearing the chirping of the crickets and that kind of thing. It's a very calm and relaxing movie to watch if you like that kind of thing, and I definitely do. And I loved the scenes when the kids learn about the fact that their grandfather had died during the atomic bomb and dropping on Nagasaki, and they go to the city and they go to the site of where their grandfather would have been at a school where he worked as a teacher, and that was where he died. And so they stand in this new schoolyard, and there's this monument, this kind of burnt and kind of warped old iron play set, I suppose. and they kind of stand there and pay their respects, and they see these other monuments. They go to the bomb site, I think it is. There's all these different tributes and kind of sculptures that were delivered from all these different countries, you know, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia, and so on. And the young boy says, well, where's the one from America? And the oldest teenage girl's like, well, you know, it's a bit awkward. They're the ones who dropped the bomb. And the grandmother very much says, you know, that not that she resents Americans, but that, you know, that there's still that lingering thing there. Although at one point she does say, you know, I neither like or dislike Americans, you know. But I can see why people got their feathers ruffled by the film, but at the end of the day, Richard Gere's character, Clark, he comes to visit, and he says to the grandmother in a very touching scene, again, lit by moonlight as they sit outside the house, he's like, I just want to say I'm really sorry, you know. And you know, and she accepts it, you know, and then she says, thank you very much. And I loved the way that he really made the effort to speak Japanese. Obviously his father's Japanese, but you know, I just like that. It was really kind of sweet, and he really was this respectful character. So I find it weird how people got so annoyed by this film, because the film was about regret, but also respect. And I loved those themes and how they were weaved into the film. There's a great scene when he walks into the room where the kids are playing a song on the piano, and he's kind of saying, oh, very good. And it's kind of the right amount of awkward for this kind of brand new guy to come into your life from a different country, who's, you know, from a completely different culture. And he kind of speaks some of their language, they speak some of his, and they try and speak English and stuff. It's very sweet, very believable, one of the best scenes of the film, I thought. And I just thought he was great, actually. So a memorable part of a film that was very memorable to me, because I really connected with the characters, and when they had fun, I had fun, and I had a big smile on my face. And I think the most impactful scene is when the grandmother is standing outside the house, and there's this whole backstory where she's telling the kids stories every night, and one of them is that one of her youngest brothers, who she does remember, had radiation poisoning and lost his hair, and so he would stay inside his room, he'd never see anyone, and he would just draw all day long. He would draw an eye. And so they're talking about this a lot, and they see a snake one day in the river by a waterfall, and they say, is that the eye that your brother was drawing? Snake eyes? And she said, no, not snake eyes, the eyes of the Flash. And she points out from where the house is out to the valley, and there's just a beautiful kind of mountainscape with these, you know, the mountains going down like this, and then beyond that kind of valley is the city of Nagasaki. And that's why she didn't die, because she was there 10 kilometers away from the blast zone. And she says that when the bomb went off, me and my youngest brother were standing here, and we looked out and we saw it, and she just tells the story of seeing this mushroom cloud off in the distance where the city is, and how it seemed as if an eye opened in the flash, and that's what her brother obsessively drew, was that explosion. And they do a little bit of a special effect and stuff, but just her telling the story got me in my chest, you know, imagining that, because there are people who saw that. There are people who saw that nuclear bomb blast in their own city, and it is just, if that doesn't instill some kind of, you know, deep-seated horror within you, I don't know what will. And the actress who played the grandmother was great at conveying that. She was a good storyteller as far as the character was concerned, and the actress. So I loved it. I really did. It's not a great film or a masterpiece, but it's one that I really connected with. The ending is a little open-ended, I suppose, but it's an incredibly memorable image, at least. So I like that a lot. I wish we'd got more Clark, because I thought Richard Gere was so great, but I liked the way that the movie flowed into, you know, wondering whether they go to Hawaii, what was going to happen, and the kind of the stress of them sending letters back and forth internationally. I'm like, oh, but, you know, there's not enough time, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I really liked it. I would definitely watch it again and again. Gotta buy it, you know. I mean, Download hooked me up with a copy, but this is definitely one to own, and I really hope that Criterion does a Blu-ray of this one, because I'd love to see it in high definition in all its glory. Some really nice cinematography here. It's not in the sense of any of his color films, I think, just in terms of the way it looks. He doesn't lean too heavily into the color here, I don't think. And also just the way that this film is shot feels much more pedestrian. It feels much more relaxed, I suppose, and appropriate to the story, I think. It's very respectful, you know. I just like, again, I loved the progression of these kids realizing the gravity of what had happened in 1945. So it's an important film about remembering as well, and having the respect of remembering, regretting what happened, but also kind of you know, realizing the strength it takes to carry on. At one point the kids are saying that, you know, people go on as if nothing had ever happened. So the idea that these kids, they want to remember, they want to treat it with respect, they don't want to just brush it off, you know, and I think that's an important message too. So yeah, Rhapsody in August, I loved it, really, really did, surprised me again. Yeah, so there we go. That's all I got to say, I think. Now the final film, Madadayo, that's just how you pronounce it. It might be like Dodes'ka-den, where people will be saying it in the film and I'll get the more concrete idea of how to pronounce it. But until then, I'm going to go check it out. So I got it on Filmstruck, and if I do watch it, which I am going to watch it, it's going to be an all-nighter. It's way over 2 hours. I'm going to have to pull an all-nighter and probably stay up until tomorrow night, I think, because at this point I've gone so far, so far beyond. I mean, I've been taking breaks between these movies. I mean, I showered, I cooked dinner, and after Dreams I was so kind of amped up I had to just talk to people and tweet about it and stuff, so that was another 45 minutes. So the night has really dragged on. That's what happens with me. It's why it's hard for me to kind of marathon films. Unless I'm doing the 24-hour movie marathon, I kind of get really distracted. Doing it in one sitting is kind of hard for me. My attention gets drawn in so many different places. But I feel like it's my duty now to see this through to the final film, Kurosawa's last film from 1993, Madadayo, which I believe the English translation of is Not Yet. So I'm intrigued to see how that plays into the story of whatever the film is about. I'm ready to go on one final adventure with Kurosawa. Well, I say one final. I believe this will take me up to 20 films that I've seen by Kurosawa. So there's at least another 10, which is kind of cool. I'm glad, you know. And also, his other 2 films that he did in colour. I feel like if I'm doing 5, I may as well do the other 2, right? But, you know, this is kind of, it was meant to be a one-and-done marathon in one sitting, no kind of multiple-day thing. So maybe I'll add a tiny coda to this video where I'll talk about Ran and Dersu Uzala, which are his other 2 colour films. I've seen Ran, haven't seen Dersu Uzala, going to be watching both of them very soon to do reviews for them, because they're both in the book, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. So, yeah, I might add that as a coda, just so that this Kurosawa in colour marathon, which has become so much bigger than I thought it was going to be, will have my thoughts on all of his colour films. I think I should do that, if it's only 5 minutes or so. And then the full reviews will be there to kind of get deep into my thoughts on those 2 films. Anyway, waffling over, on with the next film, the last film. Here we go. Alright, here we go, Madadayo. Good old Filmstruck. He's coming, apparently. The main character? Or just a nobody? Time will tell. Alright, see you on the other side. Kurosawa's final film. Well, it is extremely early in the morning. In fact, there's Lily leaning on the curtain and giving me a bit more light. If you want to just part the curtains? No, I'll do it myself. Hang on 2 seconds. Ah, there we go. Light. Awesome. So this turned into more of a 12-hour movie marathon than just what I thought would be a 3-movie marathon. I don't know. It became so much bigger than I thought it was initially going to be. And I think that's a good thing. I'm really happy with how this whole thing turned out. And I'm glad that I pushed forward and did those last 2 movies, because they weren't disappointments compared to Dreams. Neither of them were as good as Dreams, but they were really good. And I finished watching Madadayo about an hour ago. Just been thinking about it and kind of, you know, trying to keep myself awake for the rest of the day. I'll probably try and get to bed early tonight and reset the body clock, as I tend to have to do sometimes, because I'm a night owl and I end up staying up too late, and then I can't get up in the morning when I should, so I end up kind of staying up all night and kind of just resetting the whole thing. I do it far too often anyway. Madadayo. I was joking earlier when I said maybe like Dodes'ka-den we'll hear it said in the movie, but we do a lot. Madadayo, like it's a big part of the film, and it means not yet, and the film is about a real person. I forget the guy's name. He's always referred to as Professor in the movie. But it's a real person who wrote books, wrote essays, and so on, and this is based on his life. He was a German teacher in Japan around the time of the war, and many years preceding that as well. So I guess probably the 20s, 30s, and 40s would have been his his career as a teacher. He decides to retire. He's making a nice bit of money on writing on the side. And the film follows his reunions with his former classmates. When he retires as a professor, many of his most prized pupils are now in their 30s and 40s and so on, and they've become very good friends of his, and they come over for, you know, drinks and so on, and food, and him and his wife are very accommodating, and so on and so forth. And eventually they hold this festival, they call it, the Not Yet Fest, the Madadayo Fest, where they all get together, all his former classmates, to honor him on his birthday. And they start that on his 61st birthday, because we see his 60th birthday, then the following year they decide to hold the Not Yet Fest. And it's kind of in aid of, I suppose, getting him a new place as well, because they cover how his house was burned down in one of the bombings during the war, and he goes from a very nice house that he worked very hard for and was able to quit being a teacher for and focus on his writing, and then he lost everything. And him and his wife were downgraded to this just shed, basically, and it's just horrible to see. And eventually they build him a new house and a garden and everything, and it's great, but it's also surrounded by the wreckage of all the other buildings that have been blown up over the course of the war. So, you know, Kurosawa, he, again, entrenched, no pun intended, in you know, post-war Japan. You know, really kept going back to it again and again. Nowhere near as strong as in, I'd say, Rhapsody in August or in Dreams, but it's still very much a part of this story. And this is a guy who was, you know, around during that time in the 1940s, and it's interesting he was making films around the time of World War II. So Kurosawa isn't someone who was creating this period film and trying to, you know, research the details. He would have known all those details to bring into Madadayo and to make it feel authentic and feel like it was from the 40s. And I feel like they did that, although a lot of the film, the majority of the film is you know, in the professor's house, wherever he lives, and it's these reunions he has with his classmates. And it's a very sweet film. It's a very uplifting film, an optimistic film, where we have a teacher who isn't just there to cash checks, and we never really see him being a teacher. The film opens with him saying to his class, "This is my last day," and we instantly get the feel that he is a teacher who can have fun with his pupils. You know, he comes in and says, "Some of you have been smoking here, haven't you?" And he's like, "Well, when you know you can't do it, you just want to do it even more, don't you?" And they all start laughing. So he's a witty guy, and that wasn't a good example of his witticisms, but he's a guy who jokes around with his class, and he clearly is a warm-hearted person and shares that with his classes, and doesn't stay within the regimented idea of being a teacher, just A to B, this is this, and that's it, job done, you know, clock the card in and out and back home again. But he allowed himself to kind of let his guard down and become a person to these kids and to form relationships with them, which had obviously lasted because he had all these guys in their 30s and mid-30s or 40s who were, you know, still friends of his and would come around. And so it's an amazingly funny scene when he first gets his new house and he moves in and his students are helping him. And they're talking about how, you know, you got this place cheap because apparently it gets burgled a lot. He's like, "Oh, I'm not worried about that. That's not going to happen. Besides, I've got a great plan in place for that." So at like 1 o'clock in the morning that night, two of his pupils who are I mean, there's loads of them. When they have these Madadayo fests, these birthday celebrations, there's like, you know, 30, 40, 50 of these guys who've, you know, still kept in touch with him and so on. But there's around 3 to 4 key former pupils who are the main characters, I suppose, and are kind of there the most, I suppose. And two of them, they go to his house at 1 o'clock at night and attempt to break in just to show him that maybe his cunning plan to stop burglars from ransacking his house was not as good as he's letting it on to be. So they break in and they go around the back entrance and there's this sign that says "Burglar's Entrance," and they just crack up, and I was cracking up too. It just really tickled me. They go inside and there's another sign saying "Burglar's Entrance this way." They go inside and there's like a little room set up and it says "Burglar's Lounge." There's like some cigars on the floor and stuff, and they start cracking up. Then there's another sign saying "Burglar's Exit," so they're like, "Okay, fair play, he got us on that one." I love the humour in that, and there's some really funny moments in the film. I don't think that, I don't know, is it a great film? I don't know, I'm not too sure. I think as a film, it has flaws. It lingers a bit too long on some of the stuff and drills it into the ground. And there's a lot of hero worship to this guy. You know, I mean, it's almost like Gandhi or something like. He's like Mother Teresa. You know, these people love him, they adore him, they dote on him, they'll do anything for him. And it gets a little bit too much at times, especially in the first Madadayo Fest, where they all stand up and say something nice about him, and they have this big party, very loud and rambunctious and stuff. And I like how by the end of the film, we get to, I think, the 17th birthday celebration, and everyone's older, and it's a lot more muted and kind of warm and adult, I should say. So I like the contrast between those two different scenes. But in that initial birthday celebration, I mean, it feels like it goes on for 45 minutes. Like, it feels like the wedding in The Deer Hunter, but just not as good as that, you know. Like, there's a couple of jokes that fall a little flat, and they sing this song that goes on and on and on, and it kind of brought the film down a little bit. And again, as I say, this guy, you know, he can make the lamest of jokes and people are laughing like it's the funniest thing they've ever heard, and it gets a little bit over the top at times. But, you know, you kind of go along with it, and I think if you like the characters, I think that that's really what counts with this film. Otherwise, there are these kind of holes in the plot. Well, not the plot, holes in the film, I should say, where it gets dragged on a bit too long. And even a part that moved me immensely, I think maybe was dragged out a bit too long, and that was the sequence where he's got his new house, and a stray cat has come into the home called Ali, because they found him in an alley, or he's from an alley, you know, an alley cat. And so Ali becomes a new member of the family very quickly, and as soon as you get introduced to this character, this cat, it disappears. And the professor is crestfallen, he's depressed, he is absolutely beside himself with grief. He is crippled by this, and he even says, like, I know this is ridiculous, I know I'm ashamed for you to see me like this, but I can't help it, I'm sentimental, and it crushes me that this cat is gone. And this is like 30 minutes of the film. They really dwell on this cat going missing, and as a cat lover, as a cat owner, it really got to me. But I do feel like it goes on a bit too long. It's this kind of very specific thing. Oh, they get a cat, they lose a cat. Let's focus on that for like this big chunk of the film. I think maybe, you know, this film would have been better if it was a little shorter. It's 2 hours 17 minutes long. I feel like it would have been a really good 2 hours, or even a really good hour and 45, hour 50. Just trim some of that stuff down. Everything in it was great, but some of it just was prolonged a little bit too long. You know, just a few minutes more than it probably should have had, you know, than it needed, in my opinion. Although, you know, it being Kurosawa's last film, I would have been like, hey, give me 7 hours of it, I'll watch it and enjoy it. The wife of the professor is played by Kyoko, I believe, from Tokyo Story, the youngest daughter in Tokyo Story. As soon as I saw her in this film, I thought, I recognized that face. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait, Tokyo Story? Like, how old must she be here? She really aged very well by the time she made this film. And she's great in the film in a real subtle kind of way. I would imagine a lot of people just thinking she's just there. But there's a lot to the way that wives were back then, particularly in Japan, where they're kind of just there to accommodate the men, you know, and she's very much in the background a lot of the times and just kind of, you know, smiling and nodding along and not being able to really do much. But I mean, that's a sign of the times. But she plays the part very well. Like, the emotions are always there, right on key, right where they need to be. And I thought she did a wonderful job. The guy who plays the professor is fantastic. He was, I believe, in his late 70s when he made this, and he's supposed to pass off for about 60 for the majority of the film. And so I'm not sure what they did, because at the end of the film he has this white hair and this white beard, and he looks very old. But for the majority of the film, his hair's dark, and they kind of add bits of grey as the years progress. But I don't know whether they kind of made his hair made him look younger first, or whether they made him look really older. I'm not sure, but either way, I thought he did a wonderful job, and he felt older. He felt significantly older in the way he performed in the later scenes of the film, so I thought he did an excellent job. All the other characters are really good, especially the core kind of group of pupils who kept coming to visit him and help him, and it was, again, just a real feel-good film of these people who had got so much out of his teachings in their youth that they really wanted to give back to him. As a friend, you know, but also just a fellow human being. When someone's in need, you step in, and there's even other characters along in the film who really go out of their way just to be nice, and it's really cool to see. in a film like this, where it's all about the feel good, I think. Although you do have that sequence with the cat, and there's this horrible, like, kind of, a couple of times we'll get his imaginings, and we'll see him imagining what happened to Ali, the cat, and you just see the cat kind of meowing in this rubble wreckage of a house and clawing over this barbed wire, and I was like, oh my god, until I realized, oh, they probably just got rubber barbed wire, so the cat's not getting hurt at all, but just the visual of it. And I love the moment when two of the pupils, they're arranging a search party to find the cat. They say, we promise you we'll find your cat. And they're looking around, they're like, oh, I don't know where it could be, where could it be? They're talking about the cat, and how over the top the professor is taking it, how devastated he is, how upset he is, and they're like, yeah, it's just a cat, you know. And one of them goes, well, think about it, he's a great man, and he has a great imagination. He has a much bigger scope of imagination than we do, so he's imagining what's happening to this cat. That's why it's hitting him so hard. I thought it was a really good little bit of dialogue there, where they just admit, like, yeah, he's got such a great imagination, there's probably going to be a lot worse for him when the cat's missing. And so anyway, that whole sequence with the cat, it really got to me, and you know, I was kind of like, are they going to find it? Are they going to find it? Oh, you know, so it was really toying with my emotions and pulling me in a lot of different directions. Anyway, it's a bit uneven overall, a little bit overlong, but ultimately it was just so much fun and such a nice film, and it feels like a swan song. It feels like a final film, but it also feels like an unfinal film. Like it feels like the last work of someone, and it feels like the work of someone who is not done yet. Both at the same time, somehow it manages to be this, because Madadayo being not yet, at these not yet fests, they all go up to the professor and they say, are you ready yet? Meaning, are you ready to die? Literally. And he goes, Madadayo, meaning not yet. You know, I ain't done yet, motherfuckers. And that is kind of what Kurosawa seems to be saying in his own life. You know, I'm not done making films yet. And literally, as soon as he'd finished this, well, not as soon as, but, you know, around the same time, he was writing more movies. You know, he kept on working on movies, but he never got to make another one, so this was his final film. Dreams feels like a very final film. It's like taking these 8 kind of short stories, like the things he never got to do maybe, and putting them all into this one big movie, my last hurrah. But I love these last few films of him. From him, they tell different things. They mean different things, and they've all moved me in different ways. And yeah, so I mean, this one just I loved it. I really did. And again, looking on Letterboxd, not a lot of people like it that much, but I think it's a really tender, heartfelt film that is a little over thick at times, but I'm willing to look past that because of how much I enjoyed the characters and how much I enjoyed the setting that they found themselves in and the banter. I mean, this is essentially just characters talking. I saw a review on Letterboxd saying this is really visually uninteresting for Kurosawa, and I'm like, it doesn't matter. You know, if you've got a story there, which for me there is, and characters that you're invested in, that's where the good stuff is. So I really like this film a hell of a lot. And I think that's about it, really. There's not much more I can go into. It's definitely one to go back to again and again, this one. All of them are, really. So yeah, where would I rank the 5 ones that I've seen? Well, Dreams would probably be right at the top. Below that would probably be, Kagemusha maybe? No, screw it. At the top would be Dreams, then Madadayo. Then, no, I don't know. Oh, it's really tough. It is really tough, actually. Dodes'ka-den would be at the bottom. I really liked it, but it wasn't that great. Ooh, at the top it's Dreams. So where did the 3 in the middle go? Kagemusha, Madadayo, and Rhapsody in August. They're all so different. I can't choose. I can't choose. I can't choose. I'll leave it at that. Maybe I'll decide at the end of the video. So this isn't going to be the end. I'm going to move on with my day. But in a few days I'm going to watch Ran and Dersu. I've already talked about this. Why do I need to set it up again? I feel like I need to set it up again because I'm filming another video for me. But for you it's all one big thing. So, this has been it for the marathon section of the marathon video. What a ride. What a ride. It's kind of sad in a way that I don't have these films to discover again for the first time. But, yeah. Loved Madadayo. Yeah, something about it that I just was really taken away by. And I do like those films where, you know, the reality of it is a bit more kind of sweet than real life can be sometimes, you know. Anyway, I'm just gonna. It's not even late. It's early. It's not even early. It's middle of the day almost. You know, it's like 11 a.m. So it's just ridiculous how late this thing got. But I was glad to do it. I was glad to power through in the name of Kurosawa, goddammit. And I'm now 5 films richer, which is kind of really, again, scary, because it's like I love to savor these films, and now I've kind of thrown 5 of them away really quickly. But what an experience, you know. Kagemusha, fantastic. Dreams, incredible. Rhapsody in August, so haunting and kind of beautiful at the same time. And Madadayo, just heartfelt, tender, and uplifting. Just a happy film. Apart from, again, the extended cat disappearance sequence. Yeah, I've lost steam at this point, so I hope you've enjoyed. I need to remember not to end it right here, because I will be putting in a final segment where I talk about his other 2 colour films. So until then, I'm going to try and stay up and then have a real good night's rest, but it has been a blast. A blast full of colour. I mean, man, he didn't take colour lightly. He really didn't. He threw it all out there. You know, there's these recurring themes of visual themes of the rainbow, and also the moon and the sun. He used quite a lot, especially in well, not especially in, but again in Madadayo, where there's a couple of scenes where they're looking up at the moonlight, and he always uses a fake moon, which always makes it a bit more picturesque, I suppose. The battery is blinking at me, so this is definitely a sign for me to stop, but I like how he uses the sun and the moon. And I think in Dersu Uzala there is a scene where you see the sun and the moon in the same scene, and that was the inspiration for the twin sunset for Star Wars. Apparently, allegedly, I don't know if that's true. I'll get to that when I get to that. And that has been, for all intents and purposes, for this section, which has been a big section, but a great one. And it accounts for, I guess, 2, 5, another 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 11 hours of films. Just, whew. But all great, all enjoyable in their own way, and awesome. So, that's it. How do I end this? I don't know. I'm sorry, what can I say? I wasn't expecting it to go this long. But I've enjoyed it. That's that. I'll see you in the next clip when I round off the other 2 films he made in colour. There we go. Okay, it has been a couple of weeks since the marathon you just saw, and I've since watched Dersu, Uzala and Ran. And I did say that I could talk about those films for maybe 5 minutes, but let's be honest, it's me, right? It's me. And as you've probably seen from the rest of the length of the video, there's a lot more to come. This is a very extended coda. A lengthy Peter Jackson-esque epilogue to this Kurosawa in colour marathon. Now, if you have previously seen my Epic Film Challenge 2 reviews of Dersu, Uzala and Ran, there's not much more for you to see here. A few more snippets that I am going to add in, but apart from that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the marathon. I loved doing it. I've now edited all that stuff, and in going back through that footage and remembering the films and sourcing all the images and stuff, it's been such an awesome experience for me as a movie lover and watcher, and I think the video turned out pretty good too. You can be the judge of that. But I figured that for the sake of posterity, because I am really happy with my reviews of Dersu, Uzala and Ran, which I've already posted online at this point, so I'd like to kind of preserve them in this video. So this Kurosawa in colour marathon is a big project that encompasses my thoughts on all of his films that he did in colour. So yeah, and it really is more of a future-proofing thing, where someone who might come to this video independently outside of my regular content. So enough waffling, let's get to it. Here is my review and thoughts on the 1975 film Dersu Uzala. There might be a few bits of information I talk about in the following 2 reviews that I've already mentioned in this marathon previously. That's just going to happen. There's going to be some overlay. I apologize for that, but let's get right to it. Here is my thoughts on Dersu Uzala. Now, with Dersu Uzala, Kurosawa was in a very tumultuous period in his career, but also his life. In fact, tumultuous would be understating it. In 1970, he made Dodes'ka-den, which was a critical failure. It did not go down well, to the point where, I'm sure coupled with personal issues, Kurosawa attempted suicide in 1971. Was unsuccessful, obviously, and beyond that, struggled to find financing in Japan. He felt that he was now seen as old-fashioned and that people didn't want to make movies with him anymore. And so it took an offer from Russia to come back and make another film. So this is a Kurosawa who had now faced his own mortality, or at least tried to face his own mortality, and was now surely a different man. And made this film in a completely different country for the first time in his career. He made a film in 70mm for the first time in his career, which is a big film format, super widescreen. I believe that was the only time he ever did that. And he made it in Russian. It's not a Japanese film in that sense. And he worked with the production company Mosfilm, who initially were keen to get him to bring over Toshiro Mifune to play the lead character, Dersu Uzala, but Mifune and Kurosawa were not on the best of terms, and Mifune would certainly not be interested in taking part in a production that was going to take as long as Dersu Uzala, which I think was in principal photography for almost a year, between 1974 and 1975. It took a long time to make, and Kurosawa was significantly homesick before finishing the film. And one of his assistants who worked with him on Rashomon onwards throughout his entire career practically, take away those few films he made before Rashomon, she said that this film and Seven Samurai were the two most grueling of productions. Shot all in the Siberian wilderness in very harsh conditions, snow, wind, all that kind of stuff. It's a really authentic film when it comes to the harshness of nature. I'd never seen the film before, but I was really intrigued to see it. I've been wanting to see it for many years, and I was kind of holding out hope that Criterion would do a nice restoration Blu-ray of it, but it just doesn't seem to be on the cards. There was a Blu-ray release of it in Italy this year, but apparently the picture quality is not that great. I watched it on Filmstruck, which they have on the Criterion channel, but it was DVD quality, and I just wished I could have seen this film in all its glory, especially in 70mm. They could really do a fantastic restoration with this if they put the money up, I suppose. It might be to do with the rights and it being a production with Mosfilm. That might be part of it, I suppose. But either way, I still got a lot out of the visuals of the film, even if it wasn't in this pristine Blu-ray quality. I'm just saying it's definitely a film that would benefit from high definition in a big bad way. This film is gorgeous. It really captures these amazing vistas, these incredible visuals. And I was intrigued to see this from before because of its links to George Lucas's Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And maybe I'll touch on that later on. Let's get to the actual film itself, Dersu Uzala. The story of Dersu Uzala, let's set it up. It's based on a book called Dersu Uzala by a Russian soldier who I can't tell you the full name of because I don't know it. I only know, the name that he was called throughout the film, which was the captain, basically. But also Arseniev was the name that I saw a few times in the subtitles, so whether that's the correct pronunciation of this guy's name, I don't know, but Arseniev it is. And he was a Russian soldier who was out in the Siberian wilderness in the early 1900s doing a topographical expedition. He was a map maker, surveyor, and was going through the woods with his men and basically mapping out the place. And the film opens with him after these events. He is reminiscing on those days in 1900, and so we follow his memories basically, and he frequently narrates throughout the film his thoughts on the expedition as it progresses throughout the film, and we go through his memory. And they're all around the campfire one night, him and his men, his soldiers, and they hear a noise out in the woods. They think maybe it's an animal. And then we hear someone go, "No, it's people." And that's a term that becomes very emblematic of the unique dialogue of the main character, Dersu Uzala, who's this kind of old man who comes out of the darkness into the film and becomes the main focus of it practically instantaneously. He's an old hunter. And at first I thought, being a Japanese film, that, being made by Kurosawa, I guess you could say it's a Russian film, but, being from the source of Akira Kurosawa, I thought that this was a Japanese actor, and maybe even a Japanese character. He had the facial appearance of someone from Japan or China, but I think it's more towards China, obviously, because being in Siberia, the location where not just the story is set, but the real events is right on the Chinese border, I think. So it was a Chinese character, but I'm not too sure if he was Chinese and spoke a little bit of Russian, because Dersu Uzala's speech is kind of truncated. It's simplistic, and he uses the word people a lot. But he also uses the word people as like an object, you know, that's bad people, you know, things like that. But he has this weird syntax, which maybe George Lucas might have taken a little bit from and used in a certain character in a sci-fi fantasy film he did in 1980. Maybe we'll get to that later on. So Dersu Uzala, he comes into the lives of these soldiers and Arseniev, and they find him funny, you know, and comical. You know, he's this kind of old, wily hunter who, you know, is a man about the woods, basically, and he claims to kind of know his way around and kind of be basically a man of nature. You know, he's a hunter, he's a tracker, he's apparently effective in doing all these things and knows his way around, and so Arseniev asks him if he will help them and guide them through the woods, and he agrees. And again, at first, they look at this man, Dersu, and they find him a bit funny. You know, he can't really help us. We're soldiers. We're capable men. You know, we don't really need this old geezer, you know, this kind of short, squatty man to kind of help us do anything. And throughout the film, they start to realize that there's something to this man. You know, he'll say, hey, there was 2 men who camped here, 2 old men yesterday. And they're like, well, how can you tell it was old men? Come on. And he's like, well, young men walk on the toes of their feet, you know. Old men walk on their heels, so that's how you can tell. And he knows all these little things, all these little intricacies. There's a great scene where, just for fun, the men have rigged up a bottle and a string on a branch, and they've swung the bottle so it's a moving target, and they're trying to shoot it with a gun. And Dersu's like, that's such a waste of bullets, you know, he chastises them. And they say, well, if you're so, you know, good, why don't you take a shot at it? And he's like, well, that'd be a waste of the bottle. He said, let me shoot the string, and then you let me keep the bottle. And they're like, oh yeah, sure, go on then. And of course he does it, because he's Dersu Uzala. And, you know, he begins to wow them, but particularly Arseniev. And one thing that could probably be leveled as a very heavy criticism on the film is that Arseniev's soldiers, his men, they don't have much character, if any at all. We don't even hear the names of any of them. And they're just there to kind of observe, basically. And so is Arseniev in some ways. But it's really, the whole film is about this friendship that forms, this bond that forms between Arseniev and Dersu Uzala. This, you know, this proper soldier, officer, you know, he's got the mustache, you know, he just seems very kind of typical of a soldier, you know, and you know, is doing this very serious mission. And then you have this kind of, you know, this little old man who just is, you know, he's got this bandana on, he's got his rifle, he's got this walking stick, and, you know, he knows all these things about the animals and stuff, and he's very in tune with the idea of the forest being ruled by a god and all that kind of stuff. He's spiritual, there's a playful nature to him. And so it's such a stark contrast between Dersu and Arseniev, and to a lesser degree Arseniev's men, but we really focus on this Russian man and I guess Chinese man, but he calls himself a Goldie, which could be, you know, for all I know, a racial slur at this point. I have no idea, because there's so many different types and classifications of race in Siberia, China, and those areas in the east. So I'm not too sure, but either way, it's these different cultures. And I loved how Dersu Uzala's kind of fractured way of speaking became such an endearing quality to him, for me as a viewer, but also to Arseniev. And again, it's all about this bond that forms, but also it's about this driving theme of man versus nature. And you have these soldiers and Arseniev who are incapable of really dealing with the really harsh realities of nature. You know, they're capable men, they're soldiers, but they don't know everything. And there's a fantastic sequence where Arseniev and Dersu, they go out to survey this lake, this frozen lake, and they go out and it's getting close to, you know, the sun going down. And Dersu says, I don't like it, this is too scary, we need to go back before we get caught. Because if we get caught in this area, because the wind is kicking up and our tracks are getting covered, if we don't find our way back to the camp, we'll die in this cold. You know, so they start to go back and they get completely lost. And it's this extended 20-minute sequence where they're trying to find their way back and they're going around in circles, just Dersu, just Arseniev, these 2 men, and suddenly Dersu says, right, start cutting grass, cut it now. And they try and build this, basically this fort to shelter them from the cold and the wind as the sun goes down. And it's just, you know, it's almost wordless to a point where they're just frantically working, and Dersu keeps pushing him to just keep cutting this grass, and it's so tense. And you know that, you know, they're going to survive, but nonetheless it's so gripping and really highlights that man versus nature thing, just the idea of us being at the whim of the world around us that we have been, you know, that we've evolved into. You know, this world that we inhabit is bigger than us. and it's more dangerous than us if we find ourselves in the jaws of its most dangerous places, and that's certainly one of the places they find themselves in that section of the film. I love the way that Kurosawa, throughout his entire color career, uses the sun and the moon. And they talk about the sun in the movie, but there's an incredible shot, which is obviously some sort of special effect, where Dersu and Arseniev are standing, looking up at the sky, and there's the sun and the moon. And it almost makes you wonder if that was an inspiration for the twin sunsets in Star Wars, but either way, that was so cool. But also there's a stunning shot of the men walking across this frozen lake, or at least walking across these frozen plains, and the sun is high in the sky, but it's dark everywhere. And I don't know how they did it, if it was some sort of optical effect, whether it was a real life kind of phenomena, but you see the sun as this kind of golden orb in the sky, and it casts this kind of very slim line of light over the soldiers, but the rest of the frozen plains are in darkness. I mean, it's just, I need to see this film in Blu-ray. Like, it needs to be restored. It needs to be seen in the best possible quality, because moments like that are just gripping, you know, and the way that Kurosawa would use color in some of these sequences was just incredible. Now, this film is not seen as a great film by most people, and I wanted to read out a couple of reviews that I read on Letterboxd, because I was really intrigued, and I don't do this often, but I thought I would look at the reviews on Letterboxd by people who'd seen this film, who rated it 5 stars and who rated it 1 star, to see the different opinions. It turns out the people who rated it 5 stars didn't have much to say about it, you know, but the people who rated it 1 star, they had a lot to say about it. So I'm going to read out a couple of those reviews for you now, because I have something to say about them. So here's one. The guy says, "It sucks a big one. Man, what a freaking chore this movie was. It's yet another example of the book forcing me to sit through stuff that clearly is not a must-see." Is this one really heralded as one of Kurosawa's greats? Because I find that hard to believe, despite the film's 8.3 rating on IMDb. I feel like Yojimbo, The Bad Sleep Well, High and Low, or even The Hidden Fortress would have been better choices based strictly on what I've heard, as I've never actually seen any of those movies. I have a hard time believing anyone even pretends to hold this in the same esteem as Seven Samurai, Rashomon, or Ran. Hell, I don't even care for Rashomon that much, and even I can see that it's clearly better than Dersu Uzala and deserving of its spot in the book. This was just so boring, with big chunks dedicated to the characters just walking through the woods and spouting nonsensical poetic mumbo-jumbo about tigers and other old men. Whatever, to each their own, but I've officially given up trying to avoid using the word boring to describe films. When you have movies like Dersu Uzala floating around, it's damn near impossible not to let the word enter into your reviews. Which of course he means boring. Now, I just found it interesting, you know, is this really heralded as one of Kurosawa's greats? It's not. I feel like Yojimbo, High and Low, even The Hidden Fortress would be better choices to be in the book. I agree. I don't even care for Rashomon that much, and I can see that it's clearly better than Dersu Uzala. I agree. This was just so boring. I disagree. Big chunks dedicated to characters just walking through the woods and spouting nonsensical. That is what the film is about. You need to be on board with this being a journey. You need to be on board with seeing their journey, not just being told about it, not just saying, oh, we spent 6 months walking through. You know, you need to see those scenes, you know. And I don't feel like it drags out anything. It's just the appropriate amount of showing this journey in every step that it shows it, in my opinion. Another review said, watching a group of men walk around the wilderness for over 2 hours doesn't promise much that I can't obtain by going for a 2-hour hike with some of my friends. That's just bullshit to me. You can't go on a hike with 2 of your friends and achieve the same amount of experience and harshness that they go through in Dersu Uzala. It's this big journey. And also, the film isn't just one expedition. The film is actually split into 2 parts. There is an end of part 1, beginning of part 2 in the middle of the film, smack dab in the middle. And we follow 2 different expositions. I'll leave that one in for free. 2 different expeditions. The first part is in 1901 or 1900. And then the second part of the film is 1907. We jump ahead 7 years. I believe it's 7 years anyway. But you really need the time to understand that they're spending a lot of time out there. I feel like it's so necessary. But I understand. I get it. I understand why people find this film boring. I understand why people don't like this film. Arseniev's soldiers, they're just there. You know, there's no characterization there whatsoever. We have other characters who come into the film throughout, but they don't really have much to add, even when we get to the end of the film, we see Arseniev's family. Except maybe his son. I think his son had a bit of character to him that I thought was quite sweet, but it's really a study of this friendship and this bond that was a real true life story of these two men from completely different walks of life. And it's about that juxtaposition of someone who comes from the established world of technology and things moving forward, living in a town, living in a reality where they can record stuff. There's a scene where Dersu's voice is recorded on like a gramophone, technology beginning to become a part of civilized life, and then the people who have lived in nature their whole lives. And Dersu has a tragic backstory. He's someone whose family was lost to smallpox. He wanders the wilderness alone and does these jobs and hunts animals and lives the only way he knows how, out in the wild. And that's a way of life. That's a way of life that so many humans have been through and have been over the whole period of our existence on this planet. And the film is about the differences there, because towards the end of the film, Dersu's eyesight begins to fail him, and Arseniev brings him over to live with him in the town, and he can't handle it. He hates it. He can't believe that there's a place where you can't just put a tent up wherever you want, where you can't just chop any tree down that you want, where you can't just fire off rounds of ammunition wherever you want. He can't stand living in a house. There's a great scene where he just says, I don't understand how people can just live in a box like this. So it shows you that, but it's also this bond that forms that is so powerful to me. That is the key to the film. Here's why I loved it so much. The first half, we see the 1900 expedition where, Dersu becomes a part of the group and they all begin to love him in their own way, and Arseniev becomes very fond of him. And then he has to go home and they go their separate ways. A great scene on the train tracks where, they say goodbye and they're walking off, and the Russian soldiers start singing a song, and then Arseniev turns around and there's Dersu off in the distance climbing up the hill, and he turns around and he shouts out, "Kapitan!" and he turns around, "Dersu!" And it was just a really sweet kind of got me in the chest kind of moment, like, oh, that's really sweet, And then, end of part 1, beginning of part 2, we flash forward 7 years. Arseniev has returned to the wilderness to do more surveying. And in the narration he says that in the back of my mind I was always hoping that I'd get to meet Dersu again, but how could he ever guarantee that he would meet this man in the wild again? And he was there for months and nothing, and then one day, one of his men comes up to him and says, there was some man outside the camp who was asking about us and asking what the name of the captain was. And Arseniev kind of is like, well, did you tell him where we were? And his man says, no, of course not. It's a military operation, I wouldn't give away our position like that. And suddenly Arseniev realizes this might be Dersu, so he runs off. And the cool part of it is that in the second expedition, it's a new crew. So no one would have known that this was Dersu. So he runs off into the bushes, into the trees. He's trying to see if he can find Dersu, and nothing. It's like, oh man, he could have been just there. And then suddenly, right in the edge of the frame, just off in the distance, through this little gap in the trees, we see this familiar, short, stumpy man walking through the bush. And then Arseniev spots him, and he says, "Dersu!" And Dersu says, "Kapitan!" And I'm welling up thinking about it. They rush towards each other, and there's a big log in front of them. They can't reach each other, and they run down to the other end of the log, and they grab each other, and they hug each other. And they're just laughing. They're so happy to see each other again. And it just, when it comes to emotion in film, there are movies where you can be manipulated by a character dying, or maybe even children of a character dying. It's very easily to make someone really feel emotional at a film and feel sad by killing characters and doing things like that. But to make someone emotional because they're happy at what they're seeing. I was so joyful. I was grinning from ear to ear. Tears were forming in my eyes, and it's a feeling that's so rare. It's easy for me to get that lump in my throat, that rising in my chest about something that's sad in a movie. But to get it about something that I'm so happy about, that they got to see each other again, that this was a true story, and that it was 7 years, and that there was this friendship that formed, and there was a possibility, a very high possibility they would never see each other again. I just was so happy. And then that night, his crew, which had never met Dersu before, they were off singing a very nice song at the campfire, but in the other end of the frame we had Dersu and Arseniev sitting together, just smiling at each other, just laughing at how great it was that they got to see each other again. Oh, it was so fucking sweet. It was beautiful. I loved it. I live for moments in films that give me that feeling, and it was just,
that just made the whole film for me, you know. And it wasn't like I was so ridiculously invested in their friendship, but I guess that the building of that friendship for the first hour and 20 minutes or so really made me feel it, you know. But also it made me think of, you know, just in our own lives, where we have friends who we see a lot and we take them for granted, you know. But if you don't see them for months and you see them again, you really appreciate that time more. And so it speaks to that, it speaks to the characters in the film, but it also speaks to you as you're watching it and how you perceive things that you take for granted. It's impossible to you know, never take things for granted. You know, you're always going to take things for granted. You know, we drink water every day. Every now and again you'll get that kind of period where you haven't had water for a very long time and you drink a cold glass and it's amazing, you know. Whereas for the most part it's just boring and tasteless and water. We always take things for granted, and I think that that includes friends and family and loved ones. And you know, this is a love story. You know, it's a love story between these two men, and it's so sweet. And as the film progresses towards its finale and Dersu is failing in health, you know, you can see where it's probably going to go. In fact, no, it's not even a spoiler. Dersu dies, and I'll tell you why it's not a spoiler, because the film opens with Arseniev trying to find Dersu's grave. He goes to this town and he says, "I'm looking for the grave of my friend Dersu." You know, there it is, and then we flash back and we see the story. So you always knew that he was going to die, but I figured it was going to be a bit more involved. And tragically, it was more throwaway, which was really sad. I won't give away how it happens, but you know, basically, we end the film with Arseniev at Dersu's freshly, you know, filled-in grave, and there was something really interesting about how the film is bookended like that. The film opens and ends with Arseniev at Dersu's grave. At the beginning of the film, it's 3 years after his death, and he has a wistful smile on his face, and he says simply, "Dersu." At the end of the film, it's still very raw, and he says Dersu in a very mournful way. And so it's speaking to the process of grief, you know, and how, you know, time does heal those wounds, and you're able to kind of remember things and not, you know, be consumed by the grief. I mean, it's impossible to move over a death instantaneously, of course, but it shows you that that grieving process and time healing things does work. But it's intriguing how Kurosawa shows you the 3 years after first, and then ends on the raw kind of immediate experience of that death of a friend. And I guess it's the perfect way to end the film, and it moved me again, and I kind of cried. And that's another thing, crying in films, you know, but my eyes welled up and a couple of tears did drop. And so I can't think of a film that has made me cry in happiness and sadness, ever. Is this one of the greatest films I've ever seen because of that? No. You know, is it one of Kurosawa's best films? No, I don't think so. I'd maybe put it in the top 10. You know, maybe a push top 5, but probably not, I think. I think Kurosawa's strengths as a filmmaker are more in the more theatrical films that he's made, you know, Seven Samurai and things like Throne of Blood or Ran, you know. This is a much more kind of intimate and simple tale, but it's told so powerfully in this very simple, easy to understand dynamic of two people from two different walks of life who go through this experience together, and it's only helped and bolstered by the fact that it was a true story. And it just, I can't wait to see it again, you know. Great visuals, you know, and two, I wouldn't even say two great characters. I think Arseniev is very bland in a lot of ways, but Dersu has enough character to hold the whole film. The actor who played him was just incredible, so fantastic, and I don't think he did many films, but he is so memorable, and it kind of begs the question, you know, what would have this film been like if Toshio Mifune had played Dersu? I think it would have been a lot different, and as great as he is, as much as I would have loved to have seen another Kurosawa-Mifune collaboration, I think the actor who played Dersu was so perfect that he was the one to be in the film. I liked the stuff with the tiger, you know, and how much Dersu holds reverence for the tiger and how that plays into the story. The river sequence was riveting, you know, I mean, I was so on the edge of my seat throughout that whole sequence. And, you know, this actor who was, I think, 50 or 60 when he made this film, jumping off a raft and grabbing onto a tree branch in the middle of this, you know, big current river was kind of a cool little action-style movie moment, I thought. But, you know, the tension from that scene. But it is a slow-paced film. It's a slow-burning film. Is it a film you should see before you die? Yes. Now, it's not an easy yes. It's not a, oh yeah, definitely. But if there is just the smallest chance that you could react to this film the way I did, everyone should see it. I can't guarantee that though, you know, it's just one of those things that hit me. And maybe, sadly, it might not hit me the same way again. But today, you know, I watched it this morning. Today I'm holding on to that feeling that the film gave me this morning. You know, when, very simply put, these two friends are reunited. And, you know, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. It was just so awesome, you know, that they were so happy. You know, Dersu, Kapitan, you know, that's one of my favorite moments in film history now. Fuck it. Like, that's what films are all about. And Kurosawa, this is the final Kurosawa color film I've seen. And I've spent the past 2 weeks watching all of his color movies, and I think it's one of the great periods of his career. I don't care what anyone says. A lot of people say that this film marked the decline of the quality, and it's just, what are you talking about? You know, he made some incredible films, and they're so wildly different from Dodes'ka-den, you know, to this, and then to Ran and Kagemusha, and then Dreams, which is so fucking completely different, and then Madadayo, which is like almost an Ozu film. Rhapsody and Orga. I just love all of his color films, I really do. Well, maybe not Dodes'ka-den. That one was a little more wanting, but you know, he did some incredible work in the later half of his career, and I think that some of the films he made when he was 60, 70, 80 rival the best work of some of the people who, you know, working in their prime in their 30s and 40s. You know, what an incredible filmmaker. And it's been such a joy to watch all of those films for the first time, except for Ran. I'd seen that before, but even that felt like a rediscovery. So I'm one very happy film fan right now who has just watched 7 films that I love, or 6 films that I loved. You know, the 7th one, Dodes'ka-den, not so much. But yeah, so look forward to, if you haven't seen it already, I'm not sure when I'm going to post it or not yet, but I'll be doing a Kurosawa in color marathon. I have done a Kurosawa in color marathon, and that'll be a big video. And I'll talk about this film for a tiny bit in that too, but that's my thoughts on Dersu Uzala. I'm just hoping, praying that Criterion release a Blu-ray of this and do a great restoration, because I would love to see this in high definition. I can't wait to see it again as well. I might go back and watch that sequence with the building the shelter in the windstorm on the frozen lake. That scene was just so good. And maybe I might watch the scene where they reunite again. And that's another thing, is that it deals with that thing we all go through, which is death. And this is Kurosawa, who had just come off of a suicide attempt a few years earlier. And all of his films, in a way, well, not all of them, but most of them deal with mortality, even if it's a plot device, but also a thematic device. Death is a big part of all of his movies. And this one, with the death of Dersu, and you know, it deals with how we use memory, I think, in remembering, because this is a story told in flashback. At the beginning we begin with him at the grave and stuff, and then we end with the very raw scene where he's found Dersu's body, and it's so tragic, and you've got the men there who are digging the grave, and they're so like numb to it, you know, they're like, come on, we've got to finish this, you know, sign the death warrant. And it's so flippant, it just broke my heart, you know. But it's you know, it's how we deal with the death of people, but also how we can remember those good times, you know. That's something that we have, this incredible facility our brains have to remember things. And so the film kind of, you know, for me, reminded me that, you know, hold on to those things that you find special in your life, those friends, those people that mean so much to you. Enjoy those times. Enjoy your Dersu Kapitan moment that you can have with people. But if not, you know, if you happen to take those moments for granted, you have the memory to remember them and to savor them for as long as you can. And that's an important thing. And that's what I got out of the film, and I fucking loved it.
Yes, indeed. I really did love that film, and I'm happy with how that review turned out, because I got a copy of the Italian Blu-ray and got the best possible images I could to use throughout the video. So again, it feels like a cheat using a previously made video to kind of slot into this one, but I was really happy with how that turned out. Now, one thing that I really wish I had mentioned, which I can now do in this marathon video, is the sequence where Arseniev has his picture taken with Dersu, and we see the picture in black and white, and it's a very kind of realistic, authentic feeling old picture. Basically, it looks like one of those old you know, 1900s images, and that's the same for the montage sequence that we see of multiple photographs taken throughout that period with his trip with Dersu. And he talks about how that period of that second expedition that Dersu joined him on was the happiest times that he remembers with Dersu. And the whole film is really about remembering, and photographs are a great tool to remember these moments, these snapshots, and that's what the whole film is. It's the snapshots of this man's memory of this friend that he made, and I think that the photo montage is a perfect kind of just embodiment of what the whole film is about, and so I think that sequence is great, and I really wish I'd mentioned it more in the review itself. Now, we move on to the 1985 film Ran, which is pretty interesting, I think, in terms of how I approached it, because, well, you'll hear all about that. I talk about my history of the film and how I, you know, changed my opinion somewhat when I watched it the second time round, so let's just waste no more time and get into my thoughts, my review on the 1985 film Ran. Here we go. Ran was Kurosawa's final epic in terms of that big scale movie that he became very well known for in films like Kagemusha, Dersu, Uzala, Seven Samurai, Throne of Blood to some degree. He made lots of different types of films, but he also exceeded in the big epic, and Ran is huge, maybe even his biggest film in that sense. And at this point in Kurosawa's career, he had gone through a fair amount of struggle, you know, from 1970 onwards. We talked about that in the last video. And, you know, he was forced to go to Russia, basically, to make a film with Dersu Uzala. And in 1980, he was helped out by some fellow filmmakers from America, in terms of George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, and so on. The people who, you know, had been inspired by him in the beginnings of their career were now helping him out and helping him to continue on this incredible legacy. And by 1985 with Ran, he teamed up with a French production company, I believe, and also another Japanese company to make this film Ran, because it was an incredibly expensive film to make. And at the point that this film was made in 1985, it was the most expensive film made in Japan at the time. And you can really see why. Like every cent, you know, every what's the currency in Japan? Yen, you know, whatever you want to call it. Every tiny bit of money that was spent on this, you can see it on the screen. It's all there. It's a monumental film visually, but is it up to snuff with the story? My first experience with Ran was about 5 years ago. I did my Akira Kurosawa Appreciation Night, which, you know, looking back on it, wasn't really done anywhere near as well as it should have been, but it was fun to do it and to watch these films, and it was the first Kurosawa film I'd seen in colour, and so it was so exciting to see this different flavour visually of a film from a director that I was becoming so enamoured with at that point in time. About a year after watching Seven Samurai, I'd been devouring some of his films from the 50s and 60s, and now I got to see this later film from Kurosawa, and I wasn't sure how it was going to stack up, you know. Kurosawa was an old man when he made this film. Would it be as good as his other films? And it was. But I've always had the feeling, since I saw that film 5 years ago, that the first hour and 15 minutes of Ran, you know, that's almost like one of the greatest films I've ever seen. But after that, it kind of just tailed off a little bit. It was still very good, but nothing matched up to that first hour and 15 minutes. That's the feeling that I've had in the back of my head whenever I think about Ran, ever since I saw it. So after I, you know, had seen it once, I wanted to see it again to do this review, because it's been 5 years. A lot can change in that time in terms of the way that anyone views a film. And the recent restoration done in 4K had just been released on Blu-ray by Studio Canal, so I have that. I watched it and was able to see it in amazing quality, even better than I had before. I think I even commented in that video 5 years ago that the video quality wasn't amazing. It was great here. But an hour and 15 minutes into the film, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking that, okay, this is where it's going to start going downhill. Hour and a half into the film, I thought, wait, it's still great. What was I thinking before? 2 hours into the film, I thought, this is amazing. Like, how did I miss out on how great this film just continually is? Past that point, an hour and 15 minutes into the film, which is a very pivotal and incredible scene in the film, maybe even the best. I went back after watching Ran for a second time, and I watched my thoughts, which is the great thing about doing these videos. I can go and see my immediate reactions to films. And I hadn't said that. All I said was that the first hour and 15 minutes you could almost take as its own movie and it would still be a masterpiece. I never said anything about the film declining in quality after that. It's just the way that it's formed in my memory made me think that. So this film was just an incredible rediscovery, where I was so surprised at how great the rest of the film was, you know. And so that was just a joy, you know. I'm happy for my brain to make these mistakes if it enhances the viewing experiences of revisiting films after a very long time. I was just floored by this film. I was stunned by it, even though I'd already seen it. I was able to appreciate some certain things more. I think that
this is a film you really need to see more than once. And whereas with Kagemusha, which I haven't reviewed as part of this series because it's not in the book, but that's a film that is similarly epic in scale, has a similar, almost, well, not similar story, but, you know, similar time period, big battles, that kind of thing, grand in scale, all that kind of stuff, but I feel like it bogs itself down a little bit too much in details that slightly confuse the audience. Whereas in Ran, everything to me feels really vital to the story, and none of it is confusing, and it's so well done. The characters are so clearly defined, and the story is laid out in a very easy to understand way, even though there's a lot of things going on. And I think that people would probably be surprised with how much they'd enjoy this, especially with the success of something like Game of Thrones. You know, look at something that's about, you know, people hundreds of years ago, you know, where it's all about the, you know, the inner workings of clans and families and positions of power and backstabbing and sex and blood and war and bloodshed, all that kind of stuff. You know, it's so hugely popular with Game of Thrones. I feel like this film has a similar vibe to it, but is, you know, much more well executed than something like Game of Thrones, which, you know, it's great, you know, but the level of execution here in terms of the cinematography, the direction, the acting, the production design, you know, is just off the charts. It really is. The story centers around a Lord Hidatora Ichimonji, the head of the Ichimonji family, and he's clearly been a warlord and someone who has trampled over people to get in this big position of power. He has many castles and so on, and he's played by one of my favorite actors of all time, Tatsuya Nakadai, who is just one of the best actors ever, actually. He's not just one of my favorite actors, I think he is one of the best actors of all time, from his performances in Kagemusha with Kurosawa to his performances in Kobayashi films, from Harakiri to The Human Condition, which is just a stunning piece of cinema. And he's fantastic here too. It's unbelievable. I saw a recent interview he did this year, I think, for Criterion. He's now 84. And he looks older in Ran than he does now, which is some, you know, 30 plus years later. Which is only a testament to not only his acting, but the makeup, which is just so incredible in Ran. It really makes him look like someone who's 70, 80 years old, but also speaks to his incredible good genes because he's 84, but he looks like he's 65. Anyway, that's an aside. So Lord Hidatora, at the beginning of Ran, is holding this fairly casual kind of excursion up on this hilltop with these gorgeous landscapes. And that's another thing with Kurosawa. When he moved into the realm of making films in color, it wasn't just this, okay, now I'm doing what everyone else is doing. It's like, no, I'm not just going to move from black and white to color. I'm going to move from black and white to color. You know, I mean, his first color film, Dodes'ka-den, just primary colors everywhere, maybe even too much. And, you know, in certain films, he really leans in on that color and really uses it for interesting, you know, cinematic means. Like, he really uses the color to tell the story better. In Ran, not so much, but I think that really works. Like, the color in the film is really good. Like, there's 3 sons that Hidatora has. And at some point, they all fight each other. And so they all have their own kind of specific color-branded banner. So when you see like the blue banners or the red banners, you know which side you're looking at. So he uses color in interesting ways that help tell the story. It's not as bright and colorful as some of his other color films, but nevertheless, the color is so vibrant and vivid in the film when it needs to be. And like most of Kurosawa's films, very visually striking. So Lord Hidatora is a man who, you know, seemingly has it all. He is very much placed in a position of power. He's kind of sat in the traditional kind of place of power where he's sat there and everyone else is sat in front of him in this excursion in the hilltops at the beginning of the film. He's got a couple of other lords there who he previously had fought with but is now friendly with, but they're very much seen as below him. And he has his 3 sons, Taro, Jiro, and Saburo. And he decides, after having a bad dream, which kind of foreshadows the rest of the film, that he is going to make this announcement on the hilltop. So he gathers everyone around, and again, just looking at the scenery in the film alone is just so enjoyable. Like, Kurosawa picked these incredible locations, various different mountains in Japan. He used some actual proper castles that existed, built this castle for one scene where it gets burned down, which I'll get to later on because that scene's unbelievable. Yeah, I'm going to get sidetracked to this review because there's so much to talk about, but right, the beginning of the film, the story, right, so he sits down with his 3 sons and a few other people there, and he says, I've decided, you know, I've had a long life and everything, and I've ruled the land for long enough. I'm passing over power to my sons. My eldest son, Taro, will take the first castle, and he will be the lord of the land. My second son, Jiro, he will take the second castle, and my youngest son, Saburo, will take the third castle, and they will all support each other, and I will live out the rest of my days traveling to each of my sons' castles. I will still retain my title of the Great Lord, and everything that goes along with it, but for all intents and purposes, my eldest son, Taro, will be the leader. He will take over the role of the Lord that I've had for so many years. His sons don't take too kindly to this. They feel like it's going to split them up. They feel like it's probably not the best move, and maybe they can't even live up to the great name of their father, Hidetora Ichimonji. But he insists, and so his eldest son, Taro, accepts this. The second son, Jiro, also accepts this, but the youngest son, Saburo, completely rejects it, and he is just, he's really petulant about this, and he thinks that it's just ridiculous, it's going to split them up, and he, just is very much against it. And in being so outspoken and truthful about this in front of all these people, his father, Hidetora, gets very angry, and there's a great scene where he takes an arrow and gives it to each of the sons, and he says, "Break it," and they all snap the arrow. And then he takes 3 arrows, and he passes it to the sons. He says, "Now break the 3 arrows." First son bends the 3 arrows, he can't quite do it. Passes it to the second son, he can't quite do it. Passes it to the youngest son, Saburo, he can't do it, so he takes his knee and he snaps it. And that he's making this point, and he's basically, throwing egg on his father's face. So Hidetora gets incensed with his youngest son, and he banishes him. He says, "I no longer have a son," And the performance by Tatsuya Nakadai here is so striking, and it is very much informed by the Japanese No style of theatre performing, where you'll have this kind of static and silent performance that just bursts out into this very kind of aggressive and loud and striking style, and he pulls it off with great aplomb, I think. And I often wonder with some of the lines of dialogue, because I feel like the writing in the film is great, just really well done, that the lines are... And obviously I have to think of it in terms of lines because I'm reading the subtitles, but I just thought the writing is fantastic in the film and very poetic. But I often think how it would sound in English, the way they deliver it, and I just don't think it works. I think there's something about the language of Japanese that is almost poetic, and I wonder if maybe they feel the same about English. Probably not, but I feel like it just works in different languages, where just the way that they stretch out some of the letters and the vowels and stuff just lends itself more to the poetic dialogue and being able to deliver it with great kind of theatricality. I think it really works. Anyway, that's just my opinion and the way that I perceive it. I'm sure other people would feel differently, and people who speak Japanese, understand Japanese, would probably have a completely different opinion on it as well. Anyway, he bans his youngest son, gives his eldest son Taro the keys to the kingdom, basically. And Taro's wife, Lady Kade, she becomes the lady of the castle and so on. And she begins to start pulling the strings. And Lady Kade is a really intriguing character because she is very unlikable, and she comes across as a bitch because she basically sees about and sets the wheels in motion to ban Lord Hidetora from his own kingdom. She gets under the skin of her husband Taro, the oldest son of Hidetora, and she makes him get his father to sign basically away everything, and eventually they banish him. And so this is a story of this Lord Hidetora who is, again, just the absolute grandmaster of the land. He has everything at his fingertips. He doesn't want for anything. He is just seen as the absolute top dog, and he gets everything taken away from him. Not just his title, not just his castles, not just his men. Well, he does have a few men who stay behind with him out of loyalty, but also his family, his sons. And very slowly but surely, they turn against him. And then they turn against each other. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on with the plot I'm not going to get into beyond that. But we just see the deconstruction of this lord who just eventually has nothing and is driven to insanity when he realizes that his sons are actively turning against him. He just absolutely, just loses the plot. And so for the second half of the film, and it's a long film, 2 hours and 40 minutes, and just to compare it with Kagemusha, Kurosawa's previous film, and another big epic, also starring Tatsuya Nakadai as a big lord. That film's 3 hours long, and I feel like it's a little bit over long in terms of stretching out some of the battle scenes and stuff, even though they're great. And I feel like Ran is perfectly structured in terms of length. 2 hours 40 minutes. It's long, it's an epic, but it doesn't overstay its welcome, you know. You're only going to get 1 Seven Samurai per career, where you can do 3.5 hours and it just breezes by, and the length, it really doesn't matter because the film's so incredible. But with Ran, I think it's perfectly timed at 2 hours and 40 minutes. Appropriate in length, in big scope and everything, and it allows the story to be told very slowly, but you get these different perspectives of the sons. Not so much the younger son who gets banished at the beginning of the film. We basically don't see him for the majority of the film. We hear about him and stuff, and his character progresses, but we don't really see him until towards the end of the film. But it's really Taro and Jiro, the two eldest sons, who jostle for position in terms of being the head of the Ichimonji legacy, basically. But Lady Kade, she is, she basically is out for blood. She is out to basically just disgrace the name of Hidetora and to ruin his life, this great lord. But she has a very specific reason for that. Because when she lives in the castle with her husband Taro, that's the castle where her family, had presided. Hidetora, this great lord, he basically came into this castle and killed the family who owned it. And that was Lady Kade's family. So her whole life has been this long play, waiting for the moment where she could strike and where she could get in that position of power, that she could banish the lord who had killed her family. And so she is someone who's lived a life of waiting to exact her revenge. It's that old, that old saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. And she really has to wait basically her whole life to serve that dish to Hidetora. And, she is a very cold person, but she's been molded by that experience. And I didn't really catch that the first time I watched the film. She's so interesting. And the performance is, again, much like Tatsuya Nakadai, the performance of the actress who plays Lady Kade is very theatrical, again informed by the Japanese No style. Very striking, visually, the way she holds herself, almost statuesque, and then at times she'll explode in these moments of theatricality. Particularly a scene where she seduces Jiro and becomes, kind of continues her place of power in the family, and she makes all these horrible demands, and she's just such a despicable character, but it's someone whose whole life has been based on this horrible thing that was done to her family. And so she is consumed by that hatred. She is consumed by that feeling of wanting to get revenge on Hidetora. And at the end of the film, basically, that's what she gets. And, in her final scene of the film, she basically says she's ready to go down in flames. She's ready to sink with the ship. That's her life's goal, is to see the whole Hidetora family go down and just, and again, go down with it, basically. And so I thought her character was so captivating to watch. And we see the effects of different people who've been coloured by the Hidetora, family history, which is a very sordid and blood-soaked history, And Hidetora is not just confronted with his sons betraying him, but he's confronted with his history of violence, with his history of horror. There's a moment where he is just completely beside himself, and he gets carried into this hut. It's the only place he can find for refuge, and the person who lives inside this hut is a man who had his eyes gouged out by Hidetora. And that's the moment when he is completely head-on faced with the horrors of what he has done. It's like he never even realized it. It's like in this pursuit of power, in the pursuit of all this stuff that he's done to make himself this great lord, he really didn't think about or conceive of what he was doing to all these people. And he's now being stripped away of everything, stripped away of his title, his power, his family, and all he has left is the horrors of what he's done throughout his life, and he can't handle it, and he goes absolutely insane. Though there is a scene when he speaks to the wife of Jiro's character, and he greets her, and she's very kind and smiling to him, and he's like, you shouldn't smile at me. Look at me with hatred, because I did horrible things to your family, It kills me when you look at me with a smile like that. So he is aware of what he's done. But ultimately, at the point where his sons have turned against him and he's lost everything, that's all he can focus on, is all the bad stuff he's done. And he just completely withdraws into a shell of a human. And the makeup on his face throughout this second half of the film really accentuates how grief-stricken he is and how lost he is. He looks like a ghost. His face is so white and pale, and they've really just made him look gaunt and jaundiced, and his hair, which was kind of combed back and stuff into the the top knot and everything, is now out and wild, and it's a stark kind of visual image of this guy who just looks like a complete madman. You know, you look at the way he held himself at the beginning of the film, with great poise, you know, straight back, and there's this ceremonial robes, and now he literally is in kind of his sleeping robes for the second half of the film, and hair wild. You know, he's been completely deconstructed as a person. And there's something kind of sad about that, but also satisfying. And that's probably the only thing I could say against the film that's holding Ran back, is that there isn't really any characters in it that you root for. They've all done bad things. You can understand why some of them are doing the things that they do, but most of the characters in the film don't have any redeeming qualities. So you're really watching this implosion of a family in great effect, where there's bloodshed, that people die, there's wars. You know, the sons, they bring their armies and they have these big battles and everything. There's huge kind of action sequences, but you know, there's no one to really care for. That's the only thing that I think the film has going against it, except for one character. And I never really caught this before either, probably because the character is so comical. And we see this character right from the beginning. It's the character of the Jester, who is Lord Hidetora's, he calls himself a nurse, basically, a carer of sorts in the second half of the film, because he's the one who stays behind with Lord Hidetora and helps him through this period where he's going completely crazy. And there's another loyal servant as well who comes along the way, but it's really this Jester character who is there to basically just entertain, to sing these silly songs and do these silly dances. You know, he kind of does this thing at the beginning of the film where he's joking around about one of Hidetora's sons. And so Hidetora's son's guards go to kill him, basically, or they go to attack him. And Hidetora kills him. And there's amazing, well, not amazing sequence, but I loved it, where, you know, the Jester's about to get, you know, attacked, and suddenly the guy gets an arrow in his back, and he falls over and he's dead. And everyone looks up to the castle, and there's Hidetora, kind of like 1 foot on the window ledge, just like that, with his bow and arrow, just badass as fuck, just like that, and just pulls the thing back in and goes back in the window, like, yeah, fuck you, trying to get my Jester, you know. And that's kind of the first sign of him just really going unhinged, basically. But the Jester, towards the second half of the film, is really faced with how much he cares about Hidetora, and how much he's formed a bond with him, even though it's this very, you know, servant-master relationship where he just lives to serve. But he's also playful with Hidetora in a way where he'll kind of poke fun at him and then run off, you know, so he has some balls to him. And it's played by this actor who looks very feminine. And I was almost like, is that a woman? I'm not sure, but it is a man. And just has very delicate kind of almost female qualities to his face. But either way, there's a very tender emotion that is brought out from this Jester character in the way that he perceives Lord Hidetora's descension into madness, you know. He's frustrated with it because he has to kind of care for him like he's a kid, but he also cares about him, and he kind of wants to, you know, wants to bring him back. And towards the end of the film, when things seem hopeless and he gets really upset at this, that really got to me. So the heart of the film is this Jester, this fool. And I thought there was something wonderful about that. But outside of that aspect, that all the characters are really kind of hardened and live to kind of screw over the other characters and to kill other people, you know. So there's no real moral compass. But that's kind of the point of it, I suppose. But otherwise, that was a complete digression on the morality of Ran. There's so many great sequences. The cinematography is stunning. Probably the best sequence of the film is right when Hidetora completely loses the plot. He's staying in one of his castles and it gets attacked. He gets taken under siege by these armies led by his sons, and it's a massacre. It's an absolute massacre, and all of the sound gets dropped out. You see these horses piling in through the gates. You see people getting hit with arrows. You see things going up in flames. You see guns firing off. No sound, just the music. People getting slaughtered, just the music. Hidetora up in his tower, and everything is crumbling around him. You know, blood going everywhere. You know, his the women in his entourage killing each other. You know, just committing suicide to be free of this you know, this horrible inevitability of this siege that is going to kill all of them. And he's left alone in the top of the tower, just completely stricken. Burning arrows flying past his head, and this is all done for real. You know, Tatsuya Nakadai sat there with these burning arrows flying behind his head. And eventually he leaves the castle, leaves the tower and walks down the steps, you know, his sword sheath just hanging by a string by his feet. He's just completely in a daze. And the tower behind him is burning, it's going up in flames. It's all done for real. It was a one-take thing where they were burning down this thing and they had to get it in one shot. And it's one of the most stunning sequences in the history of film as far as I'm concerned. And it is the high point of the film. It's just so so effective and so captivating, mesmerizing, all those words you want to throw at it. It just, unbelievable. And that's when he begins his descent into just, you know, again, almost just becoming a ghost, you know. It's like he's not even a human, you know, and that he's already passed on. And he, for a majority of that second half of the film where Hidetora is out just kind of wandering, basically, he stays in the ruins of a castle that he previously destroyed. How much more fitting can it, how much more ironic can it get that he is spending the last part of his life just wallowing in complete dementia inside the burned, charred ruins of all the horrors that he's committed over his life. It's so poetic, and it was based on King Lear, but also, or influenced by King Lear, but also based on other Japanese stories from this time period, and Kurosawa took from many different places in creating and crafting this story. It was a film that he wanted to make for many, many years, and finally got to make it here, and I'm glad that he did. The music that plays during that sequence where all the sound drops out is so effective, and that's a piece of music that gets used, I think, towards the end as well in a really effective way. The character of the boy whose eyes were gouged out, the blind boy who plays the flute, was a very memorable, if brief one. And, you know, I got so wrapped up in this, I really did. There's a moment of violence, I think, and there's a moment of implied violence in this film that moved me to tears. Like, it was just so powerful and horrible. And yeah, this film was just so much more effective the second time around. There's great moments in it, and just great interaction between all these characters that I'm so interested in seeing what they're going to do next. Even if I'd seen the film before, a lot of it I you know, lost the details of, so I was so gripped by everything that happened in the film. I think Lady Kade is one of the strong points, where everything she does, you know why she's doing it, but you disagree with it all the same. And there's still kind of a weird kind of, you know, satisfaction you get out of seeing her get her revenge, even though what she does is despicable. You know, it's just one of those things where you kind of root for the bad guy, even though, you know it's wrong. But in her case, you do know why she's doing these things. But all the characters are confronted with the horrors of killing. And that's what this film is about to me. This film is about the stupidity of war. It's about, you know, how meaningless it all is, and how at the end of the day, you're all fighting for power, and you're all killing each other. And at the end of the day, you're going to be left with nothing. That's what this film is about to me. You know, I'm not going to spoil what happens to any of the main characters, but it's a film that very clearly paints the idea that you know, no matter how big your army is, no matter how much power you think you have, that amount of greed, that amount of lust for power is always going to destroy your life, and war is so fucking stupid. But apart from that, it's a great tragedy too, and I think tragedy is a theme in stories that I think people gravitate towards. There's something to be said about seeing something just utterly get annihilated, you know, and Lord Hidetora's downfall is certainly that. But also, the first half of the film deals with Hidetora and basically the events that basically take place with him getting banished and him losing his mind. But the second half of the film kind of cuts back to him every now and again. He becomes less of a central figure, and it goes more to the sons and their greed for power, their lust for everything that their father had probably done previously. So it's that kind of thing of, like, they're just repeating the history that, you know, ultimately led to their father, you know, losing everything too. But they're not learning from his mistakes. They're not trying to deal with things in a civil and peaceful manner. They're thinking about, how can I, you know, assure my place of power. So it's a cracking film. It is absolutely incredible, and I think one of Kurosawa's absolute best. And I was just floored watching it again. I couldn't believe how good it was. It's one of those films where everything is firing on all cylinders. There's the awe of the scope. There's the captivation of the performances. There's the intrigue in the story, and there is the wow factor of the way the film is put together, the editing. You know, the staging of these huge... This is the most bloody Kurosawa film for sure. All these guns firing off, and it's almost unrealistic to a point too, where they're just firing off so many rounds again and again and again. But it's just it's almost like a picture being painted. You know, it doesn't need to be completely accurate. You know, there's it's the feeling of that just pure power of people trying to kill each other. And I loved how in the big battle sequence at the end, which is just, I mean, just seeing these mountains, you know, like miles away, and there's all these horses coming up, and we got the main characters in the foreground, and all these extras in the background, a mile away on top of this mountain, just immense staging, you know, and composition, all that kind of stuff. But in that big battle, you've got horses charging towards each other, and there's these people hidden in the forest, and they're all firing with their guns. There's no way, if that actually happened, that they would shoot all of these rounds off and none of the horses would get hurt. The horses would be dropping left, right, and center. But you never see that in the film, and I fucking love that. I don't care about fucking realism when it comes to stuff like that. All you see in that sequence are men falling off the horse, and there's some pretty heavy falls, and there's like loads of them too. The horses, you know, they're not getting hurt, and I'm all for that. Do these big battle sequences, get horses involved, but you don't trip horses up. You don't do that shit. And Kurosawa didn't, and I love that he didn't. So that was a big plus for me. I almost had a smile on my face during that scene, even though I shouldn't have, because I thought, good on him, good on him. He didn't do the stupid thing of you know, making horses fall over and stuff. Get the men to do the falls, because they have the means to say, I'm willing to do that, you know. Anyway, that's a weird thing to leave on, but is it a film you should see before you die? Absolutely, definitely. This is an absolute masterpiece. Just one of the greatest war films, I think. One of the greatest epics. Again, the only thing it has lacking is that kind of, you know, main character, or, you know, multiple characters that you really care for. You know, look at some of the greatest films, you know, ever made, and that they have great characters that you love, or you at least like. You know, there's not many likable qualities, and you can maybe empathize with Lord Hidetora in the film and his complete and utter downfall, but ultimately you know that it's probably something that he deserved because of all the things he'd done in the past. And I love kind of seeing a character who basically has to, you know, deal with the consequences and the karma coming back to get him after everything that he's done. Still, I did kind of root for some of the characters there, you know, a little bit, but there is that definite argument to be made that there isn't a main character that you can really link into and kind of feel like you completely are on board with that character and their motivations, their actions and everything, except for that jester, you know, who was so loyal and heartfelt in his, you know, in his caring for Hidetora. Even though, again, I like that he showed impatience with it and, you know, just scorn. You know, like, I have to take care of this old man all the time. You know, I'm being his nurse. You know, it's just so stupid. You know, but you can tell that he really cares about him, and he sheds a few tears about, you know, just how stricken with you know, worried he is over his master. So I thought that relationship was really touching. Even if his kind of love for him was a little bit misguided, there's a humanity to it, which is, you know, without that, I think the film would probably really suffer from not having likable characters, but that just about saves it. So yeah, I mean, if it had a few characters that you really loved and they had a goodness to them, I'd love the film even more, and it might be one of the one of the greatest films I've ever seen. But that kind of holds it back just a tiny bit. As it is, as far as a film that has that stuff with war and just how horrible it is and how stupid and pointless it is and being a tragedy, you know, I think that it is one of the greats, you know. There's a lot of good things to be said about it, and I think I'm kind of just miring myself down in this one point now, to the point where I'm just rambling myself into circles, so I'm going to leave it there. It's a film you should see before you die. And just like that, it's over. It's finished. We're at the end, and if you've watched this far, I hope that you've enjoyed it. Clearly, if you got this far, you got something out of the video, so I hope you had a good time joining me on this epic journey through 7 movies by one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and to me now, I think probably my favourite filmmaker, purely based on the fact that I really did write off those other 6 movies that I hadn't seen, and found a new appreciation for that 7th one being Ran. And, you know, I love his colour period. I actually think that it's underrated. I feel like I love some of his colour films a lot more than I love some of his black and white films. Now, Seven Samurai will always be the gold standard to me. That is the greatest film I've ever seen, and I'll get to that in some extended fashion at some point in the future. And there are more Kurosawa films to talk about, and I'm just really happy because I love talking about films. I love kind of preserving my thoughts on them, and I really feel like this whole video basically encompasses everything I could really want to say about these 7 films. Now there's more things. I've been watching the commentary for Dreams and so on. There's all these little bits and pieces, like the snow sequence where the guy collapses on the mountainside in the snow blizzard, and the woman starts covering him up with blankets and stuff, and I thought that was maybe a vision of his wife, but it's actually this Japanese legend of this demon woman, I suppose, who kind of preys on travelers in peril. So there's loads of details that I could, I guess, talk about, but really I've covered all my feelings, I think, on those films, and so I'm really happy with that, really happy with the video.
thank you for watching, and if you have got this far, leave me your thoughts. You know, let's get talking about these films. Although you've probably heard enough about these films to last a lifetime at this point, but I definitely want to do another Kurosawa-centric marathon at some point. Maybe a completing Kurosawa marathon where I watch the remaining films of his that I haven't seen, of which there are now actually 8, I believe. So that could potentially be a whole other marathon to itself. But for now, this has been one of my favourite movie marathons that I've ever done over the years, and I've done quite a few of them at this point. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, no doubt, somewhere along the line. Goodbye.